Right. Greetings and salutations to all among us here today as we embark upon another installment of one of the most important topics, a realtor hot topic. And today's topic is making the case for innovative and inclusive housing solutions. And as a bonus, we got a panel discussion. I'm David Kennedy. I'm your 2020 Canopy Realtor Association MLS President elect. I'm welcoming each and every one of you to this important event as we continue to do the important work of making our association, our profession, maybe even our world a more diverse and inclusive, better place to be. As realtors, we have an opportunity to work with the public and private sectors to shift thinking to lead the community to more inclusive and innovative housing solutions. We have the honor today of some of the great leaders among us who are well versed on issues related to fair housing, affordable housing programs, as well as housing partnerships. Let us endeavor now to roll up our sleeves. To kick things off this morning, we're going to hear a special message from Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles and Charlotte District 2 Representative Malcolm Graham, followed by a powerful presentation from Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who will then facilitate a panel discussion with Mark Boyce, Willie Ratchford, and Jada Grandy-Mock. Due to the star power we have here today, we will be recording this program so you can go back and view it again and again and be inspired by logging on to www.carolinarealtors.com. Now, let's get this party started with two special messages from the Mayor of Charlotte, Vi Lyles, and the District 2 City Councilman Representative, Malcolm Graham.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles, and it's my pleasure to take part in this year's annual visioning session for the Charlotte Regional Realtor Association. I'd like to thank Rob Nanfeld and David Kennedy for allowing me to address your organization and let all of you know how much I appreciate your hard work and the support you provide for our city. As you probably know, Charlotte is now the 5th fastest growing large city, and we've risen to the 15th most populated city in the United States. As a result, we've had some growing pains, especially in the area of affordable housing. Fortunately, we live in a generous community that continues to go above and beyond for others in need. This month, Charlotte approved a second $50 million referendum for affordable housing. This funding leverages other public, private, and nonprofit dollars to increase the supply and accessibility of housing. As realtors, you also play an important role in our future success. We always rely on your insights and perspectives when it comes to concerns or any concepts you might have for removing barriers. You are on the front lines, and we need your expertise to be successful. We value our partnership with the real estate community, and it is essential to where we want to be as a city on the rise. Thank you again for inviting me to speak today. Please have a productive and an enjoyable meeting.
Good morning. My name is Malcolm Graham, a member of the Charlotte City Council representing District 2, and I also chair the Great Neighborhoods Committee for the City of Charlotte. It's indeed an honor as well as a privilege for me to be here this morning to speak to the Canopy Realtors Association. I talk about the work that I do as a member of the council, and more importantly, the work that the committee is doing, the Great Neighborhoods Committee. Again, the Great Neighborhoods Committee is a committee of the Charlotte City Council. I was appointed by the mayor to serve as his chairperson. And basically what we do is all things neighborhoods in the city of Charlotte. We focus on housing as a primary focus in terms of how do we increase the supply of affordable housing and well maintain affordability throughout neighborhoods and really work in terms of street funds and the construction of curbs and gutters and sidewalks. But more importantly, the work of the committee really drills down to the priority that the mayor has set for us, which is the access of affordable housing in our community. And so we work along those lines in terms of trying to really combat that through a number of measures that we have. One, which is the bonds that was recently passed by the voters of Charlotte, $50 million for affordable housing. This is the second time in the last 4 years that the voters have committed to the city $50 million to reduce and help with the affordable housing crisis in Charlotte. The private community has matched that. So we have a number of dollars already circulating throughout the community, working with developers along the affordable housing channel. We have a housing trust fund, which is where we use those funds that the voters have given to us to work with developers from a wide variety of spectrums, those who are doing relationships as relates to homelessness, the men's shelter, the women's shelter, those who are building homes at 30% of AMI, 50%, 80% of AMI, and getting people into home ownership opportunities. So the Housing Committee works with a wide variety of developers and constituents in the community, trying to make sure that they get the type of housing necessary for them to be successful. We also work with a lot of developers in terms of NOAHs, which is naturally occurring affordable housing, trying to renovate some of the older apartment complexes in our community, putting them back into service as affordable housing units. Those NOAHs really can begin to get people into homes sooner than later. And so that's another avenue that the city is doing, trying to reduce the affordable housing metrics. In addition, we also are trying to create policies that will help us do that as well. Two of the policies that we are currently undertaking right now are those that came out of the COVID-19 task force. The mayor appointed a task force to respond to COVID-19. As many of you are aware of, a lot of our citizens in the community were disproportionately impacted by the virus. They lost their jobs, their income, etc. And so the Housing Committee, via the COVID-19 task force, really worked to provide families in our community mortgage relief, rent relief, utility payments, etc., because those were the three main things that we really found that families were really struggling with from a housing perspective during the COVID-19 as we go through it. We also identified policies that we can put in place that would help with the affordable housing situation in Charlotte. One that we're currently processing through our committee right now is the source of income discrimination, as well as issues relating to reentry, those who were incarcerated coming back into our community, who've already paid their debt to society. They deserve the opportunity also to live in an affordable housing scenario where they can get housing. Certainly a lot of people have discriminated against them. And so lastly, again, our goal is just to provide the type of housing necessary for our community. The committee has worked hard to get that done. And we look forward to working with the Canopy Foundation as we move forward. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
I echo Mayor Lyles' sentiment. Our community, especially our realtor community, is incredibly generous. And I thank you all for your generosity today with your time and your attendance. And now on to the main event. Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who prefers to be called Dr. T, is a dynamic speaker and best-selling author. She is president, CEO of TheCaseMade, which is an organization dedicated to helping leaders powerfully and intentionally make the case for systems change. In her role at TheCaseMade, Dr. T works with hundreds of passionate social change makers, innovators, and adaptive leaders around the country who are diverse, equitable, and inclusive, who are building better and stronger communities. Dr. T, good morning. and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, David, for the introduction. And I have to say, not only thank you to you, but also for everybody at Canopy, particularly the planning group for this session, who has been just absolutely fantastic throughout this entire process. I haven't had as much fun kind of planning a session with a group in a long time. And this conversation is especially just gratifying to me as a former 49er. No, I didn't go to UNC Charlotte, but I taught actually at UNC Charlotte for several years. I taught in the Department of Political Science and in the doctoral program in the public policy PhD program. I taught many graduate students and actually many graduate students who now serve in Charlotte government in a number of facets, some of which are in the housing department. So I have lots of friends and family and folks that I love in the region. I lived there in the early 2000s and was one of the folks who were one of the first investors in NODA. We not only bought a home there early on before it was the fancy schmancy place that it is now. We bought a bunch of commercial property there early on when folks were just looking at that area as possibilities. We saw the possibility in it. My husband and I, we invested there. And in late, right before the 2008, 2009 kind of, let's just call that the challenge, I was called to DC to work as a political appointment under Bush in Secretary Leavitt's office in the Department of Health and Housing. And so I left the Charlotte region, my husband and I, to move to DC at that time. But I have to say it was with a lot of angst because we absolutely loved the Carolinas. And so at some point we may be winding ourselves back to the Carolinas. But we've now settled in Orlando, Florida for the time being. And I have to say that it's gratifying to hear all of the exciting things. And when I heard Mayor Lyles and Councilman Graham really talk about the work that y'all are doing as a growing city and trying to figure out how you get smart about that growth, what we call smart growth, is really important. And so my comments today are hopefully going to help you all as realtors help to move the region forward, right? You all certainly have a professional role as realtors and a job to do in that respect. But what I'm going to be asking you to do, I think, and what this moment is calling you all to do, is to really help move adaptive leadership kind of forward across the region, because that's the way you steward the growth of the region in a very unified, thoughtful, and inclusive way. So my comments this morning are meant to help you on that journey. That is my primary kind of what they might call, in French they would say, my primary raison d'etre is to kind of help us to kind of live into that moment. So let me start by just talking a little bit about just kind of sharing a little bit about what I do in my practice and what I do across the country, because it may help to understand where the comments that I'm going to share with you, where they're coming from, right? The perspective of my practice. So my background is I got a PhD a long time ago. I thought that the way to help our communities and our cities kind of get to a better place in terms of solving some of the challenging issues, not just in housing, but in health and climate and all kinds of issues. I thought that the way to do that was by having really strong expertise in data analysis, that if we just had the right data and we could show policymakers and business leaders and we could show community groups like the data that would suggest that an investment in housing for all groups of folks, or the investment in better healthcare, or the investment in some of these issues, like that would be enough to change the conversation, right? Because people would say, they look at the data and they say, oh my gosh, look at this, the data says it. We get financial returns that are strong when we invest in the power and capacity of all the folks across our region. We get social returns, people are better educated, they're happier, they're healthier. Oh my gosh, this is a slam dunk, it's easy. Well, 30 years, right? I'm gonna date myself, 25, 30 years since I got my PhD, right? We have a lot of data and the conversation has only gotten more difficult. And so my conversation and my sort of work has turned, not so much from data. Data is important and we're going to talk about that, but to the way that you actually make a case. Data has to be incorporated into a bigger story that we're telling about the future that we want people to live into, about the vision that we have for our region. And so it's so appropriate that you all are visioning Charlotte's future, right? In this case, Canopy is a major part of that visioning, right, for its role in the region and its role in that future. And that's really what I help folks to do. And especially around this issue of building public and political will, right, to advance very specific and innovative housing solutions. So we're going to talk about that today. You know, my roles, people know that I go around the country proselytizing and working hard with different groups across the country to do the work of building public and political will. And in some communities I work, there's a lot of public will, but there's very little political will, right? You got folks who say we need more affordable housing solutions, or we need greater resources for folks who are homeless or experiencing homelessness, or we need greater missing middle homes, or whatever that is, but they're having trouble getting policymakers to listen and to respond to that. And so there's a whole strategy that we work with for how they do that. In other places, you've got lots of political will, and this is what it sounds like what you have in Charlotte, where you've got a lot of political will, but oftentimes the public will is not kind of always there with you, right? You got a lot of sometimes, right, some difficulties understanding how to cite some of the housing that you want to do. You got some not in my backyard kind of stuff often. Or you get some of the, what we might call the bananas, the folks who say, I don't care who the housing is for, build absolutely nothing anywhere, never, right? We don't want it. Whatever it is, not. And so, you know, that can be very difficult. And my role, right, both as a consultant, as a speaker, as kind of a partner in many of these respects, is to help folks figure out how to get people up and over that. And I would say, especially today with so much political fragmentation, my goodness, boy, we need we need all hands on deck just about how do we align our communities in a way that allows us to advance innovative, thoughtful solutions to a wide range of problems. And housing is probably at the forefront of that. So my background in housing, especially, I worked for in many years in the housing space. I worked for about 12 years for an organization that was investing across the country in a range of, I would say, housing and community development projects. So we would invest about $20 billion a year in housing and community development projects. My role was as a vice president for knowledge, impact, and strategy. So helping us think through the strategy of how you invest those resources so that you get the most impact possible. And that involves a lot of the data that I talked about. A lot of the kind of conversations we're going to talk about today. But increasingly, I felt like it reflected the need of that work, really reflected us being able to make a stronger case for why those investments continue to be necessary, for the resources we need, but also the alignment we need. So all that to say, I talk a lot about this stuff. I write about a lot of this stuff. So you may see on my website, lots of things. I've written books about it, but also research reports. I write lots of stuff. I'm on the board of Shelter Force magazine, which is about, you know, community development and affordable housers and community development folks all across the country talking about the challenges of the work. I've been a longtime member of the Urban Land Institute and other kinds of folks who are planning and trying to work together to figure out how we make sure that there are opportunities for growth and development in our communities. So that's a perspective that I'm bringing to the table. And now I want to talk about sort of where we are as a nation and potentially where we are at this moment. So as we all know, you know, our housing systems are experiencing, I mean, we are in the thick of it, y'all. I just want to say, you know, I've been working, again, I said I've been working in the housing space for a very long time. I don't think we've had challenges this tough, really, at least in my lifetime, right? When you've got this many folks on the verge of eviction, and with no, you know, with moratoriums expiring and trying to figure out what's happening. And that's already on top of longstanding, really, really tough challenges we face in the housing space. We've got, you know, a pretty large tsunami coming our way, and you and I and all the other folks who live in the regions where we live have to figure out a way forward. And so what I would say at this moment, right, in the middle of kind of, you know, we all, hopefully many of you probably were around as realtors and you survived the 2008, 2009, right? That was kind of a blip on the screen. I think what is coming is probably going to be wider than that. The implications are bigger than that. And it's going to require literally an all hands on deck to figure out how we get to the next step. And so how we respond, how you and I respond at this moment that is really important, is really, you know, this is the moment. I'm going to talk a lot about leadership on this call today. And I will say to you that this is the moment. Many of you probably have some leadership books on your shelf. You've read books in leadership, and like this is the moment you've been reading those books for. Pull all those leadership books off the shelf. Like this is the moment, right? Right, to put all that good stuff to work. And I'm going to talk about some of the ways we can begin to do that. So first of all, before we even get there, I just want to acknowledge that we've been working hard. And I would say not just realtors, but I would say in the housing space, we have come a long way. You know, when I first started my work in housing, there really wasn't much community engagement. There really wasn't much. We sort of announced that there was some big development happen. It was going to have this many single family homes and that many of this or this many shops, or you would announce and then communities could respond. But basically there wasn't a whole lot of interaction. Today, I would say, in Charlotte, I would say, and actually I know a lot of the folks in housing department there, just y'all are doing such a great job in terms of engaging communities better than before. And I know there are always still ways to do better, but the engagement process is much better than ever before. And when I work across the country, even the kinds of resources that you can get, the regional housing plans are often made available. We got great, housing policy libraries people can go online and get. We're defining our terms in terms of what we mean by these things a little better than we have before. Trying to make sure that people are thoughtfully engaged in the process. But what I'm going to say to you today is we have not only some significant headwinds in our direction and some challenges as we try to do a better job of that, but some real big, both opportunities and challenges for how we move this work forward. So let's just first take the headwinds, right? As we try and help Charlotte and the region, North Carolina and the nation kind of move toward the future, we've got some strong headwinds. One, let's just acknowledge what they are. We won't talk about it on this call, but let's just talk about it, that partisan politics. We're in an incredibly partisan, unfortunate, we've got some, right, across the country. And so, one of the headwinds as in the housing space for us is housing has always been a bipartisan issue. And it's hard in this moment when there's so much going back and forth. We're yelling at each other about a great number of things, but we need to stay bipartisan, right, as part of the conversation to move the issues that we know are important. So staying bipartisan in this moment, even though partisanship is challenging, is important. The second thing I would say is, one of the headwinds is often when we're trying to talk about affordable housing, not everybody sees their stake in our success. The mayor was talking about a lot of these affordable housing projects that are moving forward. Councilman Graham talked about things like the housing trust and other kinds of things. It's tough when you're trying to get people rocking in the same direction, and they may not always feel like that they have a stake in those efforts, right? This is just an example that comes out of New Jersey, where the community had been asking the city council and the mayor for more resources around affordable housing in communities, because most of the resources had gone to the waterfront and some other kinds of places. And they were saying, hey, we need more resources in the community around affordable housing across the region. Then the mayor and the city council said, yes, we're going to do that. They started to develop plans for doing that. And then the community came out and protested them, saying, you're not building that for us. There's a lot of market rate stuff and it's and there's not enough affordable. And the city council and the mayor went like, oh my God, like y'all been protesting us for years, saying we weren't doing enough. Now we're doing something and now you're protesting still. And so the dynamics of that are we just have to manage that. So one of the things I want to ask y'all to be thinking about is, how do you get people to see their stake in the success of what we're trying to do, whether that's on the realtor front, but also on the development front, whether that's in affordable housing or middle income housing, whatever it is, how do we help folks to see that we are actually trying to move the region forward? The third thing I'll say is a headwind is that people have very often negative viewpoints about a lot of different things, right? So we know the term affordable housing as a thing, people's mentally, the narrative around that is fairly negative. Some colleagues and I several years ago wrote a paper that was just looking at nationally across the country, how people think about affordable housing and the backfire that you get, right? So I'm not going to talk very much about this, but I'll take the first one at the top of this thing. This is a kind of framework we put out. Then when you talk about affordable housing, often the backfire is the mobility or personal responsibility backfire. So when you say, right, we need more affordable housing in different parts of, people will say, hey, listen, if you can't afford to live in Charlotte, you got to move. Maybe Mecklenburg County is not for you. You got to go out to some other county, right? Maybe Johnson County or whatever it is, right? You got to move. Maybe South Carolina is better. Maybe they got cheaper houses there. But what you don't do is move to Charlotte or move to one of the right counties closer in and then ask other people to subsidize your being here, right? That's a problem. If you're trying to talk about affordable housing, especially, that conversation is challenging and it backfires very quickly. So part of what we did in that paper was talk about, hey, listen, folks, let's just be clear in the housing space. If you're trying to get people to advance a conversation about affordable housing, if you aren't very thoughtful, this thing is going to backfire and make it worse for us in terms of being able to get people's buy-in. And so we also talk in that paper the 10 things that you could do. Like, you gotta engage folks differently, folks. You can't assume that just shouting at the top of your lungs that this is a necessary thing is going to move people. We have to develop our skill set around that. So you can get that off the paper off my website if that's of interest. But it was just this kind of, hey folks, hey folks, I know we think we're doing some good stuff, but if we aren't careful, it actually backfires. And the last headwind I want to just talk about is just what we're experiencing now. On the left are just headlines that are in the paper that are just people are seeing every day. And a part of the challenge for us as folks who are in housing is just the fact that we often don't have a chance to do transformative work on the housing system and how we're all working together, whether it's realtors, the planning department, the banks, or how we're working together. We usually don't have the sort of buy-in to make these big transformative changes until there's a problem, right? Until folks find themselves in long lines, or they find themselves and they write the eviction moratorium and now we have to get money. I mean, it's just like, and so that makes it difficult to make sane, thoughtful, carefully planned decisions when there is an emergency. We have to act and it's a problem and we're in crisis. And oh my God, right? So let's just acknowledge that's where we are. We're in the middle of a whole lot of stuff happening in housing and in a number of other spaces that are just strong headwinds for us. And so if we're going to help Charlotte move forward, we got to be able to navigate through that. And so what I want to say as a conversation here is this is a moment that does not need more crisis communications. It is not my job or intention today to tell you how to talk to folks about the fact that we're in crisis, right? This moment needs adaptive leadership. So as I said before, this is the moment when, listen, folks, I know all of us as professionals, we take courses and we do online stuff and we try to think about our own particular leadership. Pull those books off the shelf, get all the stuff you think you've learned. I mean, this is the moment to say, this is the moment. You've been called into the game, if you will. You've been on the bench for a while, some of you, on this issue of like broader leadership. This is the moment that you've been called off the bench as realtors to serve a larger role, not just in your profession, but to help the region overcome some of the big challenges that it has. So I want to talk about that. My conversation with you today is what is it from an adaptive leadership standpoint that allows you to live into that space? And I'm going to walk you through some of that. So first of all, I want to say, as adaptive leaders, and I'm going to talk about what that means in a second, y'all are uniquely positioned both as interpreters between the technical leadership and the adaptive leadership. Technical leadership is what, like, I think, what you get out of folks who understand the technical aspects of what it takes to have a functioning housing market. When I listen to Councilman Graham talking about all the different policies that are happening and all the different funding mechanisms and capital resources and all of the different mechanisms by which housing happens, period, across the region, like talking about naturally affordable housing and these kinds of things, that conversation is a useful one for folks who understand the technical aspects of that. The challenge is most average everyday folks have no idea what you're talking about, right? Or what we're talking about when we talk like that. And so sometimes I point to a podcast that Chris Hayes did. Chris Hayes is on MSNBC. He has a nightly program, but he also has a podcast. And he did a podcast recently, actually about a year ago, where he was talking about housing. And he said, yeah, we don't do that many shows on housing on cable news shows. It's just not sexy enough, and it's so complicated. It's so technical. It's all about like Fannie and Freddie and who knows. I mean, it's all about LISC and enterprise and all about, naturally affordable housing, accessory. But I mean, who can decipher all that? Like, so we don't really cover it because we can't decipher all that stuff. And it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with regular people, right? Now, for those of us in the housing space, you almost want to pull your hair out. You go like, oh my God, of course, like housing has everything to do with every single person. There's probably nothing, I think, that's probably more important than folks having a decent, safe, affordable place to lay their head at night. But because so much of our conversation is technical, we don't get the buy-in that we need, except when there's a crisis, right? So right now there are lots of stories about eviction and lots of stories about, predatory lending and lots of stories about who can't afford housing, but very little that actually touches folks to make them feel like they want to lean in because this is a bigger story about them. And so what I want to caution folks on this call is when we talk only in terms of housing as a technical problem, our colleagues, our neighbors, our friends, they can't figure out like why we can't solve this already. Because they look at on Amazon.com and you can go and you can order up a house right now. You can literally pick up your little cell phone, go to your little Amazon app, and I will tell you can buy a house. And listen, folks, if you've got Prime, Amazon Prime, they will deliver for free. They have free shipping. And if you don't like it, you can return it for free. They'll take a free return, right? And they have different versions of it. Some of them are solar energy, and some of them have different mechanisms, smaller, some of them are bigger. Or things like this. You can 3D print a home for less than $4,000 in 24 hours. And they look pretty great. Like, it's not that, right? So when you talk to average everyday folks, we're talking about we have a housing crisis. We haven't built enough. And then folks go on their Amazon.com and they go, well, wait a minute. I don't get why y'all can't solve this. It's not rocket science. They sell it on Amazon. Just call them up, order some, put them out somewhere, right? Now, you and I both know that the conversation is bigger than that. It has more depth to it. But when we're not bringing people along on the journey for what we're actually talking about and facing, and we talk only in technical terms, right? It backfires. And let me just give you an example. You probably have some examples in Charlotte. If I were doing a little more work in Charlotte, I could probably give you some more locally grown examples of this, I'm sure. But this was an example in LA where some of the pod share people decided they were going to use pod shares to address a growing and just ridiculously unfortunate challenge of homelessness. And the pod share folks said, hey, we got some plans for this. We can convert some of our factories and some of our pods for folks. There's all of these kinds of innovative things we can do, right? In the spirit of our conversation today, innovative solutions. We want to be innovative. We want to think about what we could do from our perch, from our platform, right? And LA announced that they were going to lean into that as a opportunity, and the backfire, right, from the public was immediate. Social media just lit up like immediately. Like, oh my God, you people are just, heartless. You wouldn't put your grandmother in one of those places. You all are creating these Soviet style communal bunkers and you want people to live in that. That's not what we do. That's a voluntary concentration camp, and on and on and on. And so when I say that housing is both a technical problem, right, on the left side, the innovative technical solution, and also an adaptive problem, it's the adaptive piece that we're missing. How do we get people to embrace the fact that we're going to have to be pretty creative and innovative in how we advance and solve some of these issues around housing? And so I see this every day in my work. I'm a consultant, so I work with lots of jurisdictions. This was some work we did with the Metropolitan Council of Governments in DC, where they had developed some regional targets around what they wanted to do in housing, and they tried to put out a regional report around it. Really had a coalition of some really good folks around this effort, and it backfired very quickly. People went, oh my God, we need 300,000 houses of units. Where are they going to put this? There's a crane on every block of every part of our city. We're sick of it. We're tired of development. We don't want it, right? And that conversation was, again, it wasn't just happening from the traditional way we think about it as like single family home neighborhoods saying we don't want more housing. This was folks who could actually directly benefit from affordable housing saying we don't want it. We're tired of the traffic congestion problems that are coming from this kind of massive development. We're sick of having more people on every single block. They're building on every single green space is becoming whatever. And so the technical solution for what they're trying to solve for is that the region, so this should sound familiar to y'all, the region is growing dramatically. You got a whole lot of people who are moving to the region because of the benefits of what they've been able to do, the job prospects, the great quality of life, all the things that are there. And if you don't plan for that growth, you're going to end up like San Francisco, right? You're going to end up having people living in the street, stepping over people to get to the grocery store, to take your kids to school. Policymakers have said, we don't want to be that. We want to plan for the growth that we're having. But what I'll say to you is, if you don't bring people along on that journey, what they hear is, oh my God, y'all are building something for all these new folks to come. And if you don't get in front of that, right, as an adaptive challenge, you get that kind of backfire. Here's what it looked like in Nashville Nashville when they announced, last year they were going to do all this amazing stuff in Nashville, and folks were talking about, Nashville, we need more housing. Some of the folks in community did a little video. It's a little tongue in cheek, but I want you to see what they created to say, no.
It is a crisis.
This is a crisis.
It's time to take this seriously.
Everyone's talking about it, but no one's fixing it.
You can fix it.
It starts with you.
Get your loved ones involved.
Text your best friend.
You've seen something, and now it's time to say something. Let your voice be heard. Don't let your friends.
Your friends.
Don't let your friends move to Nashville. Nashville can't take it anymore.
We are full.
I can't park within a mile of Jenny's. I can barely walk down the street in the Gulch anymore.
Aiden lives in a van.
That's my choice.
It's been hard. I rent a room out of a Vietnamese restaurant. Sorry, just give me a second. We are full.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop it there. You get the gist of it. And I hear that. I work all across the country, and I hear that when we do community voice sessions, I hear that all the time. When you ask average everyday people what you want to have happen with housing, they say, just stop getting people to move here. Stop. Tell people not to come here. Go someplace else. Can't these folks go to South Carolina instead? Can't they go to Mississippi? Hey, they got some great affordable housing in Alaska. Stop, right? So again, the moment that we have to meet is that Charlotte is growing like many other regions of the country. You can't stop on 95 and say, don't come here, right? The fact is that you all have benefited from a growing, prosperous, right, region. You've got industry, you've got a whole lot of things that are going to attract folks to the city. And unless you plan for that growth, you're going to lose the quality of life of the city that many of you all love. And that requires adaptive, right? Getting people ready for the adaptive challenge. Listen, folks, the future is coming. We have to meet that challenge where it is. Here's some framing that came from one of the Urban Land Institute papers to help you get in the spirit of how you talk about that. Listen, folks, affordability and urbanization are two sides of the same coin. Everybody wants to live in a sustainable community, but fostering a sustainable community requires that we create diverse housing options, because literally the city cannot survive, the region cannot survive when we start to hollow out that diversity. So if we're only building luxury condos for folks who are coming at a certain income level, or we're not building enough of the missing middle, or we're not building enough, right? Literally the city can't survive when you start to push folks out of the city and you don't have the diversity that you need to have industry flourish, right? So this is not about, right? This conversation is not about you all inviting more people to come. They're coming. And the issue is, if you want Charlotte, if you want the region to survive, right, we have to figure out how to make diverse housing options available for a wide variety of folks who are going to be able to call home. So the first conversation here I want to talk about is just, listen, folks, adaptive leadership helps us to visit the future. As adaptive leaders, your role, your responsibility, your opportunity is to help people visit the future. This is the future that's coming. We know how many folks are coming to the region. Let's get prepared, right? And figure out what we need to make sure this is a livable, sustainable community, not wait and then regret the fact that folks are literally stepping over one another, right? To get to places because we didn't plan for what the future needs. And I would say, to get y'all really in the spirit of this, I have a little clip I want to play about this innovative new thing that Bill Gates at one point was talking to David Letterman about many years ago. And I want you to listen to what he talks about it, this innovative visit to the future.
But I think about this, and what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Sure.
What the hell is that exactly?
Well, it's become a place where people are publishing information.
Right.
So everybody can have their own homepage. Companies are there, the latest information. It's wild what's going on. You can send electronic mail to people. It is the big new thing.
Yeah, but it's easy to criticize something you don't fully understand, which is my position here.
Go ahead.
But I can remember a couple of months ago, there was a big breakthrough announcement that on the internet or on some computer deal, they were going to broadcast a baseball game. You could listen to a baseball game on your computer. And I just thought to myself, does radio ring a bell? You know what I mean?
So, I mean, when you think about that, how crazy does that sound? Like at some point, David Letterman was trying to sell this idea of the internet, and Bill Gates was saying, it's wild what people are doing on this thing called the internet. People are sending like electronic mail, and they're going to be able to do this. And, you know, the majority of us who lived through this were like, at that time, what the hell is he talking? Electronic mail? What do I need that for? Like, I got a post box by my doorstep. Right? And so what I will say is adaptive leaders, in the way that I'm asking y'all, is that let's mimic some of what we know the technologists often do for us, is they don't wait for folks to sort of catch up. You got to help people visit the future. The future of Charlotte is going to have some dimensions to it. Here's the population that's coming. Here are the resources we're going to have. Here's the range of technology that's coming our way. And we got to get ready for that. And so as Steve Jobs says in this quote, I was specifically thinking about you all with respect to this. You know, I looked at the Canopy strategic visioning document. Some of us are going to be looking at this more carefully later today, right? You got to help people envision things that are not even on the page yet, that are not even in, right? You got to help them visit the world that is coming so that they understand our task is not to villainize each other, it's to get each other ready so that we're prepared for it. So Charlotte can leverage the growth that we're about to experience. We can leverage what it means to have a growing, more diverse population. What does that look like that allows us to have life even more abundantly in Charlotte? That's what's exciting about the potential of the moment. And so your job as realtors, even in the professional space that you have, but in thinking bigger, is how do I help my clients, my neighbors, my community members, my council members, my mayor, my whoever that is, my banking partners, whoever that is, how do I help them get ready for the future that is coming? And so I will say to you that, you know, the world is going to change and technologists help us figure that out. This is Amazon's new delivery model that they're testing in most cities across the country. This is what I call this the mothership. This is the mothership, got drones that come out of the, you know, fly over the cities, got drones. The drone goes into the mothership, picks up a package, takes the package to your doorstep, drops the package there, takes a picture of the package at your doorstep, and then goes back to the mothership to get more packages. Clearly, listen, folks, the world is changing. We have to help folks adapt to that world. How do we leverage that kind of technology for the benefit of Charlotte? And the same thing is about to happen in housing, right? This is what's happening in housing across the country. Right? That's the future of housing. The future of housing is adapting to the fact that we need a whole wide variety. We need the missing middle, the stuff that's mid-rise, high income. We need the single family detached homes. We need the whole range of things. And what does it look like to have a complete community? We got adaptive reuse of materials. This is shipping containers. Folks are being creative, saying, listen, folks, we care about the environment. We don't have to have a whole bunch of new resources. We can use shipping containers. And when you say that to folks, they go, I don't want these shipping containers in my neighborhood. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, but you know, our ability to adaptively reuse some of the stuff can be really beautiful. This is some good looking stuff. If we do it well, here's an opportunity. It could be pod share, it could be any number of things. It could be shared housing, right? They're experimenting with in some places, especially for millennials who are, most of them are carrying so much financial debt from student loans. They're not going to be able to buy a home anytime soon, but are there some ways that we could even adapt how we think about housing so they could start to save and share for housing, or, you know, mixed development, right? Could we, what are the opportunities there? Or even in terms of just financing. This is on the left side, a church group in Houston that has been working really hard to figure out how they help their members finance a home, right? And they put a whole model together and doing really well. On the right side of it is folks who said, well, can we get tiny homes? Like maybe, I mean, the thing about it is, folks, what I'm trying to say is that this is a moment where there's so many opportunities for innovative solutions that your role potentially as realtors is to help people envision the possibilities of that and to get into the energy and excitement of what it looks like. I don't know what the future is of every community in Charlotte. You all work in particular places all across the region. right? It's an opportunity to figure it out, to reimagine it, to think big about what's coming. The energy of that is what you want to get people excited about. That's what helps to push back against folks who are like, I don't want to see anything, right? So I want to get you all ready for that. The second thing I would say about adaptive leaders, and you all probably know this as well, in your role as realtors, you all touch so many parts of the housing space. You all actually do touch Fannie and Freddie and probably many of these other parts of the housing market. Many of you touch the planning department, the housing department. Some of you touch the insurance market. I mean, y'all are touching as realtors. You touch so many people across the region as stakeholders that y'all are uniquely qualified as adaptive leaders because of the collaborative nature of the work itself. So in addition to, I want to say, bringing Warren Buffett here, who allows us to think about this second qualification, that it's not enough for you all just to know that future stuff is coming. It's not enough for you to know that the drones are coming and the modular housing is coming and the shipping containers are coming and the different financing models are coming. Predicting the rain doesn't count, right? It doesn't count if you can predict that. What counts is that you're building the ark, right? Predicting the rain doesn't count. It's building the ark, right? So it's the work that has to get done. And you and I both know that when you're getting housing solutions together, it takes so many different stakeholders that we have to learn to balance that role across those stakeholders. And what I will say about that in terms of balancing the role is there are opportunities for and the need for greater partnerships in the space. Like, for example, I'll just take another New Jersey example. This comes out of the Housing Finance Agency actually paying a hospital to build more housing right in New Jersey, because some of these hospitals have a large balance sheet that they can not only afford to do that, but they have a vested interest in it. And with a little bit of capital are willing and able to do that. And so New Jersey was the first one in the nation that said, let's be creative. How can we as housers work more intimately with the health folks, given that the health folks have an interest in and the ability to do large scale development that can really boost what we need in the region. Now, I'm not suggesting this is what Charlotte should do, but I'm saying this is an opportunity, especially as we think about the recovery from COVID-19 and what's happening, to think outside the box of partnerships, right? And how systems work together. Y'all should be working with the workforce development system and the transportation system and the health system and the education system. And so as we think about the vision for the region and your role is the intersections, right? What are the intersections that we can use that can help us to do the work we got to get done? So number 3, I got 4 of these here. Number 3 is understand that facts and data are really important, but if you don't use those well and strategically, they can backfire. And let me just give you some examples. So this is an example of the county health rankings put out that said 1 in 10 families are spending more than half of what they earn on housing costs. I saw a couple of these same kinds of things in Charlotte. I won't put them up there because I know some of the organizations that are messaging in this way you may very well know them, and I don't want to pull anybody out from the conversation. But when you think about what this looks like, 1 in 10, if I were just an average everyday person, I'm looking at that data, I'm saying, hell, that's not a problem. That's a success story, right? That means 9 out of 10, right, are not spending that much on housing. 9 out of 10 families, right, are not in this. 9 out of 10 in terms of odds. I'm sorry, that's a success story. Like, I'm trying to figure out what the problem is, right? And so this slide, which was meant to help people understand why we have to invest in making sure that we have more affordable options on the table for families that are struggling, actually does the opposite. What it does is it forces you to look at that little orange house on the left and go, well, what's wrong with them? Why can't they figure out what the other 9 families on the block was able to figure out, right? Why can't they figure out how to save their money and get a home like anybody else, right? And that's what I want to say to you all, is that's not the intention of the folks who put this together. But that's exactly what that's exactly what it makes people think. And so as a way to get people interested in the conversation about affordable housing, at least, it actually backfires. And I know there are lots of things I could say if I were looking in Charlotte, right? I saw this, like, listen, I'm not gonna say who it was who did this, but did you know that it takes 103 hours of work of minimum wage per week needed to da, 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 da. As a factoid and as a data point, that's probably true. However, most folks looking at that will just say, hell, I know. When I first started out in my life, I didn't have enough money to buy a house. So I had to room with a bunch of roommates, and we We ate beans and like ramen noodles for like 2 years to be able to afford, a better apartment. And then we worked hard at our jobs, and then we could afford a little small, tiny house in Noda, before anybody really knew what Noda was, planned to be, or, wherever it was. And then we worked hard, so when people look at that, they go, hell, I know it's hard. I mean, like, who but the very wealthy, right, doesn't have to make some sacrifices for the things they want in our lifetime. So the purpose of this slide was to say, do you know? But the response would be, yeah, I know. Let me tell you my journey. I can tell you that I worked. I'm probably one of those folks who had to work 80, 90, whatever it is, to get the things that I have in my life. And we shouldn't be setting up people for the expectation that they're not going to have to do the same. So as a data presentation, it doesn't work. And I can certainly show you something like this, which is much more equity focused, where you're trying to get people to understand the racial equity kinds of issues that just backfire, right? They're trying to just bring awareness to the fact that it's tougher often for African American and Latinx populations to buy a home, to have the resources they need. But again, the backfire, like, well, what's wrong with them? Why can't they do like what the white families are doing and save for a house? I mean, why? And so that's not what we intend. But when we're not careful about data being a part of a larger story, right, about what we all need to function, then it becomes backfire territory. So it's not that facts and data don't matter. So please do not say, Dr. T said facts and data don't matter. It is that we have to use data strategically as part of a bigger story that empowers people to action. And I won't have very much time today to kind of go through some examples of that. But in my book, I talk, the largest chapter in my book is really dedicated to this issue of how do we use data strategically so that we don't get the backfire. We get people really excited about what's possible. But I just wanted to make sure that we understood that when you see a data point where you're trying to get people excited about the possibilities for the region, you're not putting data out there that is going to backfire in a way that's not helpful. So number 4, this is my sort of last, I would say, sort of big point. I'm going to make some sub points, but this is my last big point, which is adaptive leaders. You got to acknowledge this issue around equity and justice. Like racial equity, social and economic justice kinds of issues, housing justice is important. And acknowledging that allows you to address some of the things we just talked about, right? We know, some of you might have read Richard Rothstein's Color of Law. He's one of my very good friends. Some of you may have read the way that kind of our policies have formulated, our housing policies have been formulated to create segregation, right? To create separation rather than to encourage more integrated, mixed income, mixed race dynamics and other kinds. And that has implications for lots of other things, like the increasing level of deaths of despair or some of the political determinants of health that we see, that we have to acknowledge that stuff existed. I think, to understand that we haven't, let's just say that we haven't always been our better angels when it has come to issues of race or when it comes to issues of low income families or other families, and that there is an opportunity to rethink, let's just say, housing policy with respect to some of these issues, especially in the context of what is happening now. COVID-19 is affecting all of us. Lots of our communities are going to have to figure out how we recover, but we also know that some folks are having a tougher time in that recovery. And housing policy, the way that we have sort of traditionally organized some of the housing work, has been a difficulty. So our ability to address some of these issues is going to be important. And here's what I'd say about what is helpful, right? What is at this moment? Here's the moment that we have to meet. We can take a page out of the book of the health folks when they say something like, my health depends on yours and your health depends on mine, because our fates are connected. We know that in the context of COVID-19, our ability to stay healthy is about us all working together to protect each other's health. Well, the same thing is true in the housing space as well, that my housing space, if I live in Ballantyne, I have to recognize that my housing stability is deeply connected to folks who live all across the region, right? Because we are a part of a broader regional economic economy or regional economy, right? That requires, right, that we have a region that's functioning well. So us talking about that allows us to address some of these equity issues. I may not know you. I may not be the same race or ethnicity of you. I may not have the same, you may have more or less income than me or you, but our fates are actually connected. And when we operate from that vantage point, it allows us as adaptive leaders to pull people together in a way that is useful and not have us, right, continue this unfortunate situation where we have right now, where the divisions, right, that we're seeing across the country are dividing us in ways that are just not helpful. So as adaptive leaders, we got to tell stories of interdependence, right? To tackle some of these. How are we dependent on each other? That my health affects yours. I may not even know you, right? I don't have a personal relationship with you if you live way across town, but I do know that my fate and the fate of what happens to my community and the people in my community is directly affected by lots of folks across this region that I may not even know. And I'm sorry. So the last one is this issue of understanding what it takes to pull people forward. And I want to leave some time for Q&A, so I won't have a chance to kind of go through the sort of pulling people forward, but I do at least want to go through the kind of core tenets of that. So I'm going to skip some of these slides just to make sure we have a lot of space for Q&A. So just give me maybe 5 minutes and I promise we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A here. Okay, maybe 7 minutes. How about that? So in my book, I talk about the core principles of strategic case making. So how do we as realtors, as adaptive leaders, make a powerful case to folks in our communities, whether they be bankers, planners, whether they be just average everyday neighbors, whether they be the United Way, the Rotary Club, the Chamber of Commerce, whoever it is, how do we make the case for some of the innovative solutions that we have? In my book, I talk about the sort of 10 principles of how you do that are all based in lots of good social science about how the process, what it is that allows folks, what allows us to get people to lean forward, right? And so I'm gonna just talk a little bit about a couple of these, and if these are of any interest, I'm happy in the Q&A to have more discussion. So I'm gonna selectively kind of go through some of these just so that you get the flavor of them. So the first one is this conversation about having a strong conversation about we and why, that the stories we're telling about housing are only impactful to the extent that people can see themselves as part of that story. And so when you first go out, you want to speak to people's aspirations. What is it that they want to be? This is a quote by John Steinbeck where he said, if the story that you're telling, listen, folks, is not about the person you're talking to, if it's not about them, it just doesn't last, right? If it's not about like all of us, right, versus just you, it becomes a very different conversation. And so I'll ask you to just think about, look at what's happening in the retail sector, right? Nike is one of the better brands. They do this really well, better than anybody else, right? They have, their brand, just one of the strongest brands ever. And think about how they market to you, how they get you to go in the store and buy their products. When's the last time you probably never, or very, very rarely have you ever seen a Nike sneaker in a Nike commercial? Think about that. Why not? Right? Yeah, we buy like trillions of these little sneakers. We don't know what kind of leather they're made from or the quality of the leather or how they lace up compared to other. We don't do any of that kind of comparison, shopping in the leather and the right. What Nike has figured out, and what lots of retailers know that sometimes we in the housing space don't know, is that what actually pulls people forward is when you show them their aspiration for their own lives in some way, shape, or form. So in this case, Nike's figured out that if they put in front of you inspiring people doing fearless things and positioning themselves like in this way, you get inspired. The energy of that pulls you forward. And what they figured out is they can sell you a hell of a lot more sneakers by showing you these examples of who you want to be, right? Rather than trying to sell you on the quality of their leather. And it's the same conversation that we have to do a better job in this in housing. What is it that Charlotte residents, or wherever you are in the region, what is it that folks in the region want? What excites them? What gives them broader aspiration for their own lives? And I can tell you that what I do in my practice is I work with folks to figure that out. We do something we call community voice sessions, where we listen to folks talk about their aspirations. In Minnesota, we try to talk to folks about housing. They didn't want to talk about housing, and that wasn't their interest. What they wanted to talk about was prosperity, and especially prosperity for their children. Most folks were concerned that their children wouldn't have the same level of prosperity that they did, and they talked a lot about that. And so we built a whole campaign in Minnesota around that. Listen, the campaign is called Prosperity's Front Door. You want prosperity? The way to get that is through housing, because we don't get to have a prosperous Minnesota if we don't have a diverse mix of homes in our community. We've done the same thing in DC, where folks talk to us about education. They said, listen, the thing that's important for us is education. We said, great. If you care about, this is an example of a op-ed that we wrote for them to say, listen, this is an example of how you get people who care about education to also care about housing. Think about how many educators in DC. You got almost 800,000 teachers, students, right? Support personnel, all of these folks circling around education. And we are struggling to keep a dedicated, committed, thoughtful teacher workforce, right? Because when we try to recruit new teachers, they can't afford to live here. And so they go to other places. And so as you see on the bottom right side of the screen here, listen, we said, if somebody asks you how we can improve our schools, you spell it out for them. HOUSING. If we can't figure out how to house our teachers and give them an affordable place to live, they aren't coming here, right? You don't get to retain the best folks when we don't have the best housing market. And I will say to you that Charlotte is in that similar condition. If you want, I can say, as a former professor at UNC Charlotte, if you want the best talent, if you want your companies to be able to retain the best folks, if you want folks, even in these essential personnel and the essential workforce, listen, folks, if you aren't figuring out how to improve housing, you can't keep them. So we're putting those things together, right? This is the version of the Nike sneaker. You don't get the Nike sneaker. You want education? Let me talk to you by education is directly connected to housing, and that's how you pull them forward. So I'm going to quickly go over maybe two more things. So that was navigating dominant narratives. I'll go over just two more things and then open up, I promise. So one of the principles is around navigating what I call dominant narratives. Dominant narratives are things when you've got some negative stuff that people believe about the stuff that you're trying to do, and you got to navigate around that. Homelessness is one of the housing concerns that many of us are concerned about. And it's hard to get people to lean into a conversation about homelessness. So what we've done in some places across the country is to build for them a campaign around the power of an address. So it turns out you can get people to think really well and thoughtfully about homelessness if you start by talking about how an address is powerful. When you ask people to think about all the things that an address confers. So what do you need an address for? You need an address to get a job. Usually you need an address to register to vote. You can't vote without a job. You can't get a job without, right? You can't enroll your kids in school without an address. You can't, there are a whole series, about 50 things that you cannot do in this society without an address. And we talk to folks about how powerful that is. And especially in this current climate where many of us are, God forbid, I have two teenagers, Lord have mercy. We are trying to educate our children at home, right? Because the home is now the school, right? So the power of an address, let's talk about that. Many of us are doing continuing education at home. Most of you are probably at home right now in this session. In addition to that, lots of us are working from home, right? Even most folks, and that is, and there's some companies that have announced they're not going back to a commercial space. They're going to keep all of their workforce, right? And working from home throughout 2021, maybe even beyond that. You've got increasingly healthcare being delivered at home. Telehealth has reported that the calls to telehealth went up by something like 5,000% since our COVID-19 circumstances have started. And many of those health insurers are saying, hey, listen, folks, it's cheaper for us for you all to get healthcare at home. We'll take it, right? And so a lot of that healthcare delivery model is going to depend increasingly on you being at home, right? So you need a home to be able to do that. And also things like, even in the socially distant stuff, we're asking people to socially distance, to wash their hands, to be safe. It's hard to do that without a home. So the good news, I think, for us is this environment that we're in right now confers to us the dominant narrative, which is people don't want to talk about homelessness. But man, when you start from a place of what it takes to keep people healthy, and when you start from a place of the power of an address, right, you can get folks to really think about that and go, yeah, everybody needs one of those. Yes. So what does it take in our region to make sure that everybody has access to what a home and an address confers? So I think the last one I'll do is just telling the story of us. So telling the story of us is completely important. For those of you who are, hopefully there are lots of folks on this call who understand the value of good, strong storytelling. I will tell you that we as a species are addicted to stories, so much so that when we dream, when you go to sleep at night, you dream in stories. Like, right, most folks don't dream like random thoughts, right? Yeah, they dream in these series of stories, right? And for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, I don't know how many folks remember the series Game of Thrones, but Tyrion in Game of Thrones had the best quote ever from that. He said, "What unites people? Is it armies? Is it gold? Is it flags? No, it's stories. There is nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it. No enemy can defeat it," right? So we got to lean into that, folks, right? We got to get better at storytelling and making the story about what we're trying to do in housing bigger so that people see themselves as part of it. So I want to give you some examples of just things that storytelling that I've seen done really well that might inspire you as you're visioning forward for your own work. This came out of Chicago, the campaign around, listen, folks, we need the people who need affordable housing, not they need affordable housing. We need the people who need affordable housing, folks. Okay. This one came out of Boston, where they were capturing stories all across the region from unlikely folks, the small startups who were saying, "Hey, we're starting businesses. We got to have a workforce. We can't afford to pay high prices at this, but our workers can't afford to live here. So we're moving to Minnesota. We're moving to someplace else where we can do our work, unless we can figure out a way to make it more affordable to stay here." Or professors at the university saying, "Hey, folks, I'm a professional person. I should be able to afford housing," right? All of us should, but even I'm struggling. Or folks who are in this conversation who are challenged by it. And the last thing the last example I want to say is just, Freakonomics, which does this, is an interesting kind of group of folks. Some of you may have read the book Freakonomics many years ago, and they have a podcast now where they talk about different things. They were talking about how much of corporate R&D, or how much research and development that powers industry, actually starts at home. And it's really interesting when you think about, leaders, and you think about the tech sector. Where did all that stuff start? Where did Bill Gates and where did, Zuckerberg and all these folks, where did all that stuff start? They didn't start in some corporate headquarters of a top floor of a 41st floor of a major building. Most of these folks start out like tinkering in their basements, in their garages, right? Well, it turns out that about $41 billion a year, right, of innovation starts in our basements and our homes. So when we talk about and tell the story of what's the power of an address or the story of our homes, why are we not telling that story? This is the seed of innovation. You want to know where business innovation is coming from right now? A whole hell of a lot of it is coming from Americans just tinkering around in their basements. That's a part of why housing is important for us as we think about that. So as our adaptive leaders, telling that bigger story of us, where everybody can see themselves as part of the vision, is what I think is what is really important and necessary for us to carry forward. So I'm just gonna go through. I was gonna go one more time, but I want to just end by saying, listen, folks, we're at a moment where we are raising our voice around a lot of things. Lots of us are fighting about different things. I don't want to hear. You can see it in partisan politics. You can see it in some of the neighborhood fights around different developments. You can see it in us trying to figure out how to do this. I want us to take a page out of Desmond Tutu's book, where he says, listen, folks, stop raising your voice, stop yelling and arguing. Let us, as realtors, as adaptive leaders, improve the way that we engage folks, how we pull them forward. That's how we get to have a region that is prosperous, even in the face of some of the challenges that we have. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure we got plenty of time for some good question and answers. I'm happy to go back over some of the things that people found particularly innovative or exciting or thoughtful, but I want to make sure that we have lots of time for debate and discussion. So I'm going to turn it back over to David. Hey, David.
Hey, Dr. T, fantastic is a word, outstanding. I don't have enough superlatives in my vocabulary. I am imagining a yearbook section of the senior superlatives, and your picture is everywhere based on that wonderful presentation. I'm so incredibly thankful for you there. I have a quick question for you, and don't want to put you on the spot, but the power of stories was something that really resonated to me, particularly because for years I've been criticized for being a bit of a storyteller. Maybe I'm long-winded, but give us an example of a powerful story that inspires you. about what we're talking about today.
Yeah. So David, that's one of the things that I like about you already is the ability to tell stories and to tell it from an authentic place. I think sometimes when we say we got to tell better stories, people think that they have to go out and like learn how somebody else tells a story. Some of you are going to tell stories and deliver it in, a way that is really funny. And I think, David, you embody that, like really kind of thoughtful and funny and right. And there's some of you who tell much more serious and straight-laced stories. I don't care how you tell it, but we got to get better at explaining why the work that we do is so important and being able to do that authentically. And encouraging folks, no matter where they are, to tell their story about why housing matters. And if they choose to, not all of us are talking about affordable housing. Some of us, that's our issue. But for a lot of my time, I spent talking about affordable housing, but whatever it is, what's your story? And you should be asking, every person on this call should be asking themselves, what's my story about why housing matters? I asked myself the question, why affordable housing matters. When I was living in Maryland just about a couple years ago, my affordable housing story was I live in a great community, high income, like schools are great, blah, 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 yada, yada. But we also had lots of affordable housing. We were challenged because the community was growing and there was some growing pains around that, much like what Charlotte is experiencing. And what I was sharing with folks was, listen, I got an affordable housing story too. My affordable housing story is I need Master Charlie. That was my story. And you know why? Who's Master Charlie? Why? Because Master Charlie, my kids are in karate. And they love my two boys. I have two little boys, two teenagers. At that time, they weren't teenagers. They were in middle school. And they go to karate. They love Master Charlie. Master Charlie was just Irish guy who he was funny. He was a storyteller. He just loved those kids. Every day he would tell them, do this. And they just followed him around I can't even describe it. And so every night at dinner, we'd have to hear about what Master Charlie said, what Master Charlie, et cetera. So one day they came home and said, Mom, Master Charlie's gone. They said, Master Charlie, his wife passed away. He's not able to stay, that can't afford the place where he was living. And so Master Charlie's had to move. And so there's no more Master Charlie. And I thought that was a sad thing. But what happened after that was the kids didn't want to go to karate anymore. Every day, Mom, I don't want to go to karate. Master Charlie's gone. I don't want to go there. It's boring. Nobody's there. And so every day I'm forcing my kids, I got to work, kid. You got to go to Master Charlie. And so after 2 weeks of my kids moping around and I'm like, listen, I need Master Charlie. I don't care what it costs to make sure Master Charlie can live in this community. We got to figure this out, people, because this is my affordable housing. I need Master Charlie in my life, right? And so through a lot of different things we figured out a way to have the karate school pay Master Charlie more than they were paying so that we could get Master Charlie back. And so what I encourage you all to do is to figure out what's your story. You may not need affordable housing. You may be you may have a great house in Charlotte, a great house in Ballantyne, a great house in wherever. But what's the way that you help people to see your way into that conversation? And if you can do that in that kind of authentic way, tell your story, however you want to tell it, you are living into the principles of adaptive leadership. So thumbs up on that.
Outstanding. So another question that's coming in, Dr. T, is how do you define community engagement?
So I don't know that I would say, community. I don't know that I need us to define community engagement. I would say we have to figure out ways of better talking to folks and getting them to see their stake in our success. We're all trying to figure out how to bring better housing solutions. And so what is it that allows folks to see their stake in it? And in that first, example where I was talking about the Nike example, right? They aren't trying to get you to see their stake in selling shoes. They're trying to get you to see your stake in this broader thing that you want. And so that is the conversation. It's about how do you get people to see how this issue helps them to define their own aspiration for their own lives. So what I would say is, in terms of a definition, it's about how you get people to see their stake in our success. That's what engagement is about. How do you get people to see their stake in the success of the effort and to lean forward because they're excited about it? You don't want folks leaning forward on housing issues because they're afraid, and, oh my God, all these folks are coming. You want people leaning forward, right? Because they're excited about it. There's so many things in Charlotte you can do right now. Oh my God, the world is changing. We can do this, we can do that. Listen, people, we got options, right? Right? And you do. Charlotte is at this moment where you're not stuck. I would say there are parts of the country that are stuck. San Francisco, LA, they're stuck right now, right? They're stuck because they waited a long time and they'll tell you, I work in San Francisco all the time, and they'll tell you, the population growth happened so fast, we didn't get in front of that in time, and we lost the moment to really control how the population growth would change the housing market. But in Charlotte, that's not where y'all are. Y'all are at the sweet spot where you actually have the moment to vision forward and to be really innovative and thoughtful about it. So this is an exciting moment, not a moment of disaster. This is good stuff.
I agree. And I think one of the reasons why I agree with you 100% on being in the sweet spot. And I lived in California for several years. I actually lived in the Los Feliz neighborhood that was in your PowerPoint. So 3845 Tracy Street. And it was a great house. I lived in a closet in that house. So that is affordable housing in and of itself. So being an expert in this housing forum, what is your motivation, obviously entering the field, and what continues to keep you passionate about the importance of housing?
Yeah. So I think that, so what motivates me are things like I was just talking about in terms of Master Charlie. Like my life runs better when, we have a housing system that operates for everybody. And I think the more that we get other people to recognize that, the better outcomes we get. But what keeps me really passionate about housing, and one of the things that pushed me out of a very lucrative, very cushy job and into my own practice, was I was looking at the necessity, some big crises. I look at a tsunami. There's several tsunamis that are coming for us, right? If we don't prepare for what it means to brace for those challenges. And the housing space is one of them. We are not giving enough time and attention in our communities to the changes and dynamics in our housing space. And if you don't get in front of that, man, it just gets challenging. And so what makes me passionate about that is there's a real opportunity for places like Charlotte to get in front of some of that and do some great collaborative work. I think that same is true in terms of climate issues. There's a huge tsunami coming. We got to get in front of that or we're going to lose the moment. I think the same thing in terms of social determinants of health. There is a tsunami coming. And if we don't get in front of that right now, we're in deep trouble. That one of the books I shared as part of my, in that when I'm talking about equity issues, is a book around the deaths of despair. Right. Deaths of despair in this country are deaths that people bring on themselves through drug use, through alcoholism, or through suicide. The number of deaths of despair in this country are growing dramatically, right? The population of folks, white men who are uneducated between 45 and 55, growing the numbers of folks who are committing suicide. Same thing, our teenage population, our young people, the levels of suicide in our young people growing exponentially. There's something wrong when kids are killing themselves before they have a chance to fall in love or learn how to drive a car. There's something wrong, right, that we have to figure out. And so what keeps me motivated and thoughtful about all of these issues is the urgency of them, right? And that we have the power and necessity to do something about it. So I hope when you hear me talk, you are motivated, because housing is important, right? Our climate issues are important. What's happening to our children in many parts of our population, folks who are taking their own lives, right, through a variety of different means is unnecessary and something that we can do something about.
Yeah, I believe that a lot of us here gathered today, we are the choir behind an inspirational sermon. And there's a delicate line between conversation and posturing for us that believe in the messaging. And with stakeholders, when we communicate with them, what is a strategy that you found successful for communicating with stakeholders from differing backgrounds?
Yeah, so I think you're getting, David, particularly at this issue of inclusion, like all the problems that I just talked about, and I should call them opportunities, all the opportunities for us, right, to improve the world we live in, all of them require that we bring a large number of stakeholders around the table and we get them rocking in the same direction. We are a nation of 350 million people, and it is tough to get us to agree on anything. So this adaptive leadership skill of getting people around the table and having them rocking in the same direction is really important. And so when I talk about case making, that's one of the reasons I started my practice, because you got to listen to people, because they'll tell you what you need to know to pull them forward. Right. I sometimes tell folks, and one of the principles I talk about, just the fear of loss. If you don't know what people are afraid to lose, you don't have what you need to pull them forward, right? At the end of the day, when you get all these populations the same direction, when you start talking about what we're going to lose if we don't lean into a collaborative effort, if we're not all aligned in terms of purpose, we're going to lose a whole lot of stuff that we care about. And when you understand that and you put that in front of folks, right, you're able to pull some of those folks forward. So a part of the conversation is, as you're trying to pull these diverse coalitions together, what is it that you're afraid to lose that allows us to come to the table and move in the same direction out of united purpose, because we are both concerned, but also ready to fight for what we believe in. That is really critical and important.
So let's talk race in at least one question. It's almost like
let's do.
If you're a super in a building and you're running the boiler, if you use the heat right, you can heat the whole building. If you use it wrong, incorrectly, you can burn it down. Is your approach, or should our approach be, when race comes up, do we neutralize race? Is there a way that we can use race to connect us all from different races? What are your thoughts about embracing or neutralizing race in conversations about affordable housing?
So great question. So I would say, and this is sometimes hard for housers, so I'm going to give it to y'all straight. I'm going to give a very thought-provoking way to think about this. So here's what I would say about that. As housers, right, we have a very unique role to play in terms of embracing this conversation about race, and it is increasingly important that we do. One reason for us to have a strong, thoughtful conversation about this is because we will look, even as realtors, you all will look tone deaf if you're not having a conversation that is being clearly raised by a number of events that are happening all across the country, right? You don't want to sound like you are out of tune with what's happening nationally, right? That's what you're talking about, the lip service, right? At the most basic level, right? You got to be having that conversation. But it's also the fact that for a lot of the work that we do in housing, you can't solve what's happening in housing without a conversation about race. And for the folks who care about race, they can't get to racial justice without talking about housing, right? And so I remember one about 2 years ago, I was giving a presentation to a group of housing advocates there, and I was talking about that, and they were saying, Dr. T, it's so hard. Like, we're already having a hard time just talking about affordable housing. That alone is tough. And now you want us to bring race into this. Like, these are two big, hard conversations. And I said, yeah, because from the vantage point of housers, right, when a lot of folks think about affordable housing, let's just call it what it is. They have negative perceptions of affordable housing, in part because of who they think it primarily serves. They believe, many people, that it serves only people of color. And because of that, right, they discount the importance of it for their own lives. That's a challenge for us. So if you don't address it and speak to it, you won't be able to solve some of these issues. You won't name the elephant in the room. But it's also the fact that we need the partnership of a lot of folks across the region. And if you don't address race, you're going to have a hard time getting people of color to lean in and trust that y'all are really about how do we lean into an inclusive Charlotte. If you don't address what we know are serious issues, I don't know that I can lean forward really fully, right, in that conversation. But the other piece, and I want y'all to think about it this way, this is the more provocative part of this. The folks who are trying to bring around more racial equity, they cannot get that work done without you. The number one thing that most families have to get up and over every month is their rent or their mortgage, right? More than anything else. That is the gateway. And you all know this as realtors. That's the gate. That is the number one asset that most families have. If they don't have it, right, they're almost locked out of the ability to create wealth for themselves and for future generations. So for all the folks, right, who are talking racial justice, they can't get there without you. You are the missing link here. They can't get to that. All this conversation about the racial wealth gap, they can't solve it without you. So it's almost like you are holding the missing link to a whole lot of stuff that folks are looking for. Don't just hold it, offer it up in the conversation, right? Housing is what helps us to address some of these issues around race, and we're going to be partners with how we do that. So I would just say, listen, folks, you are the missing link that allows that conversation to move forward constructively. So don't withhold that, offer it up freely.
Outstanding. So Another question, a couple of questions coming in that I'm going to combine here. It seems that maybe solving the affordable housing issue almost requires a culture change when it comes to development and zoning. Is there a common singular change that has been made in communities that have shown high degrees of success? Are there financial institutions and partnerships there that are successful that we should look to model, and what should we focus on to create real measurable change?
Yeah, great question. I don't know who offered that, but that is absolutely right. It is a little bit of a cultural shift, but I would say that you all are, my presentation would say to you all are responsible for kicking off that cultural change by the way that you show up as adaptive leaders. You all recognizing, listen, the world is changing very quickly. Everything around us, right, is going to change very quickly, and getting people to shift into the mode of being adaptive, like even in terms of the disruption, the technological disruption we're about to experience, or we are experiencing, right? Amazon is about to put us all on a conveyor belt at this point, right? Right, the way that we're going to be building homes, the way that the social demographics of our communities are changing, right? The level of threats, the viruses, even in terms of the international world, there's so much that's disruptive that we have to be always ready for the dynamism of the change that we need, and that is a huge culture shift. So I would say first, embodying that, getting people excited about that, not afraid of it, but excited about that. And David, to your point, there are a whole set of partnerships that are important in that. We got to do business differently than we did before, and try some things out we haven't tried out before. For this afternoon, as we're going to be visioning forward, we're going to be asking each other, what are some innovative ways to think outside the box? Partnerships we never thought we'd have before, but that we need in order to move this work forward. And again, the good thing in Charlotte is you've got the space and the time to really think about, like, who the health folks, how do we help make the case to the folks in the health space? They need us, we need them. What does that look like? Education, right? For a lot of communities, they get stuck and they get at loggerheads, education and housing, right? They say, oh, the schools are overcrowded, or we don't have funding for schools, so you can't have development, and they start to fight about that. So what are the ways that we build collaborative relationships with folks who are in the education sector, right? What does that look like? And so you all, I would say even for realtors especially, the particular usefulness of you all as adaptive leaders is you all are seen as relatively, I don't want to say nonpartisan, but you all are seen outside of the existing political fray. Like y'all are kind of not, folks are fighting about a whole lot of stuff, and y'all feel like y'all are really impartial. That may or may not be true, but that perception of impartiality gives you the opportunity to play a very unique role. And so, from my vantage point is, listen, I'm laying this whole thing at your feet here, people. Like, the future of the region requires y'all as impartial, adaptive leaders to help bring some of these folks together who normally wouldn't have come together. And that is a cultural shift.
You have an astute perception. Our political action committee is ranked top notch for being bipartisan. So I agree with you. We all agree with you. And all right. We are getting dangerously close to the 10:45 start time. Hopefully, if you're hearing the sound of my voice, you will make your way back to giving us your attention, and in doing so, get us all together to genuinely and heartfelt give a thanks to Dr. T for an outstanding presentation. Just already a catalyst for so many ideas and excitement. Thank you. Now, to keep that energy and excitement going, we have with us, and this is incredibly special, we have 3 local change makers, and we're going to have a panel discussion in which Dr. T is going to facilitate with these 3 distinguished guests. They are, in alphabetical order, Mr. Mark Boyce, who is the founding partner of True Homes, which is the largest private home builder in the Carolinas. From 2017 through 2020, True Homes has been rated the best place to work by an independent survey from the Charlotte Observer. Welcome, Mark. Next, we have Jada Grandy-Mock, the Senior Vice President and Director of Regional Community and Economic Development for Fifth Third Bank. She is recognized as an inspirational leader with a can-do attitude. She uses her personal and professional experience to create innovative community development banking partnerships and strategies that contribute to the organization's result. We're so honored and privileged to have Jada here. Welcome. And completing our panel is the legendary Willie Ratchford, Executive Director of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Relations Department. In his role, he is responsible for implementing programs to maintain and improve community relations, directing and reviewing equal opportunity investigations and discrimination complaints, advising committee members of community problems, and providing staff training in anti-discrimination laws, ordinances, and regulations. Extend a heartfelt welcome to you, Willie. And to Dr. T, who will be moderating our discussion. Thank you so much for your willingness to moderate, and it is into your most capable hands that I hereby pass the baton. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, David. So welcome. I want to just take a moment to welcome all the panelists and your willingness to share your voice of wisdom with all of us on the call today. I hope that the morning session sort of kicked off the opportunity for you to think about what inspires you, gets you excited about this moment. But most of all, I think to come prepared for like what are the possibilities of the moment. So I want to start there. I want to start by just having you speak about the work that you do. I'll ask each of you to just take a moment or two to do that. And most of all, talk about what gives you optimism in this moment. I think there is so much happening in our world that you could literally watch the news and get so depressed. But in fact, these days, I think that is what the news does for us. It's like, if you want a good dose of depression, like watch the news. But I think to balance that out in this moment, there is the opportunity for us to exhibit this kind of optimism. So let's talk about what gives us optimism in the work that we're doing right now. Why don't we start with you, Mark?
Great. Well, thank you, Tiffany. Well, this is a historic moment. The last 5 months of sales in Charlotte have been at a record pace. And we have a historic increase in the number of homeowners in Charlotte. The percentage of home ownership has gone up significantly since 2017 in Charlotte, and we remain a reasonably affordable place to live. So I'm excited for all of those things. But I also think that we are at as you describe, a catalytic moment. That there's new conversations that are happening, and the conversation is the relationship. And so we're seeing new bridge building, cross-sectional, cross-cultural, cross-generational about housing, and these new collaborations have tremendous potential. And so we're seeing real energy in that space. And so we're very optimistic about the future as we come together in new ways. I also believe that while these extraordinary events are happening around the world, we're taking a greater sense of ownership and agency over our role in being part of the solution on the local community level. And so we're marshaling the strength of our associates at True Homes, as well as our stakeholders, trade partners, to be part of the solution in the communities that we live and work, and in the roles that we play.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark, for kicking us off today. I would say that's a lot to be optimistic about. Why don't we go to you, Jada, and talk about, for you, what gives you optimism in this moment? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. I will say it's been a very interesting, I want to say 7 months since I've been working from my home office and seeing the world finally recognize that we're really at an inflection point. We're an inflection point where we're able to see many of the disparities that have already existed, particularly around the wealth divide and racial equality when it comes to building wealth amongst a variety of races as well as communities. I am really optimistic to know that people are really coming together that it's becoming part of everyday conversation, whereas before it was a response to a report or something that had happened. It is now becoming more, people are becoming more aware. And even in the business environment, I will say within Fifth Third, more and more of my colleagues are not just looking at ways that they can be a part of the solution within the workplace, but how they can be a part of the solution in response to changing the narratives about what is said in their homes and also in the broader community. And that brings me great optimism to know that people are open, they're willing to roll up their sleeves and make something happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Love the optimism. And now we're gonna move over to Willie. What you got? What gives you optimism in this moment? Oh, you're on mute too.
I see that. So what gives me optimism, and thank you for that question, is I'm optimistic about the work that I have done with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Relations Committee. And for those of you on the call today who may be younger than 45 years of age, that means that I started this work before you were actually born. So like yourself, I've been doing this for a really long time. But what gives me optimism is if you think about all of the recent unrest that has happened across the country, it has caused folks to realize that, to one of the points you made earlier, that we've got to be willing to have conversation about race. Over the years, I have found that when Black folk and white folks sit down together to have the talk about race, it is a really difficult conversation. And the only thing that makes it difficult is a lack of relationship. I have found that if Black folk and white folk have good, they're friends, they have good relationships, then the conversation on race becomes real easy because trust is easy. The point here is that good race relations and trust is a byproduct of the actual friendship. And so you don't go into the friendship thinking, okay, I'm going to do something to improve race relations by having this friendship. I'm going to do something to improve trust. You just have the relationship and those things just become a natural part of the process. The other thing that I'm optimistic about is also as a result of these, what's happened across the country over the past several months, is that people have begun to realize that in order for us to change the racial dynamic, excuse me, in this country, we have to recognize that that denial of racism has been our most effective way of dealing with race, and we've got to stop approaching it the way that men approach the way that men approach going to the doctor. If I just ignore it long enough, it will go away, and that just doesn't work. And so folk are beginning to realize that we can't deny it, that we've got to talk about it, and as we build these relationships, things will get better.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much there. And we're gonna come back to some of those things, Willie, especially on talking about trust and how important that is, right? As we do work together. I think you're right. You can't get very far if you don't have the sort of trust relationships built up to move forward. But before we get there, I wanna just piggyback on something Jada said in her comments, which was she was talking about, folks are rolling up their sleeves, right? They're willing to do some of the hard work. And so I want to balance this unbridled optimism with a sober assessment of the challenge of what we face. And so I want to ask a question related to that. What's one thing, maybe there may be more than one thing, but what's one thing that also keeps you up at night? The thing that you worry about most, the thing that when nobody's, when you have the quiet space of your own time, there's something in your belly that gives you just a moment to say, oh, I'm worried about that. That will require all of us to roll up our sleeves and to do some difficult work. And some of you may have talked about that a little bit, but I'd love to hear what's the thing or things that keep you up at night. I'm going to start again with you, Mark, to ask that question of you.
Great. What keeps me up at night is the recognition that we're not delivering enough land and lots to address the supply constraint. 2 weeks ago, University of North Carolina at Charlotte released their annual State of Housing report, and that describes that the challenge is really a supply driven, and we have the lowest supply in history in Charlotte. And a precondition for home builders delivering supply is the availability of completed lots. And the communities we're working in throughout the Carolinas, during COVID, we had a 3-month suspension of zoning meetings. We've not worked back through that backlog in most cities. And the speed at which we're able to get plan approvals has slowed dramatically. And so what is a 24 to 36 month period of time that it takes to go through the land development process is actually getting extended. And so the writing's on the wall that the crisis level that we're at today in terms of a lack of supply is going to get much worse in 12 to 18 months. And so I know that truth. That keeps me up at night. It's a technical issue. Back to your earlier concern, don't talk about technical issues, engage the heart. But that's a fact. And so, the wave is coming, and I'm very, very concerned about where we're going to be 12 and 24 months from now in terms of delivery of new housing supply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thank you for that. And I just want to just echo your thinking about that sort of time and speed to market or to get things done in the housing space has always been a challenge for us. But in this context, it's really a challenging. It's one of the reasons nationally that we're seeing more philanthropic organizations get out of the housing business. Philanthropy doesn't build houses, but they certainly often provide subsidy capital or ways to kind of build more of the affordable stuff than you normally would see if you were let the market alone operate. And so even in that front, we're seeing philanthropy sort of step out of it, not because they don't care about housing, but because they say it just takes too long. Like, we need the infusion of capital now. We need to, right, at a moment in time where our economy needs a boost, right? Housing is not, sort of the best place to put that. And so it's hampering not just the ability of developers and other folks to get, the product to market, but it's hampering our ability to actually attract the kind of capital that can help some of the more affordable deals pencil out, right, when there aren't other financial capital in the marketplace. So I want to just echo that speed issue is challenging for us, something we got to work through. So what about you, Jada? Something that you're rolling your sleeves up, but that there's some angst it's keeping you up at night about how we think about some of this.
So right back to Mark's point around availability. It's nothing like seeing people work so hard to finally get all their finances straight. In the work that I do every day, we're making sure that people are prepared to pursue their dream of home ownership. They do everything that they need to do. They get their credit straight. Their employment is strong. They've improved their earnings, yet they still can't find a home. And so the discouragement of those individuals that I see every day that cannot find a home that will be able to work within their income range is one of the things that keeps me up at night. But I would also argue the other thing that's keeping me up is this wave of foreclosures that we're predicting to see in our industry. I was not in this space in 2008 and 2009, but I was a commercial lender. And I saw the impact that it had. It was a trickle down effect on every single local economy that we had. And to see many of those housing values and many of those communities decimated by the impact of foreclosures, that's the other thing that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, for bringing in the sort of just the human element of it. It's not just that there's a time to market, but those homes are meant to help protect folks from a whole lot of things, even just to weather the tough times. And so when folks, even in this particular time period, aren't able to either buy a home or they have a home and they're going to end up losing it, all the upfront capital and their down payments they put involved, in those homes, they're about to lose them. It's challenging. And just to echo, just so the racial equity component of that, we also know that there's always a disproportionate impact on communities of color. We're seeing that happen, not just in the workforce development space, but in the housing space. And that causes us to have to think a little even more carefully about some of the things that Willie talked about, which is those difficult conversations. How do we have the difficult conversations about the fact that all of us are in a moment that we're struggling probably right now a little more than usual for a variety of different reasons, but some folks are going to get it really, this is going to be really, really tough. And we have to have those discussions. Willie, what about you? What keeps you up at night? What are some of the things that are about you rolling up your sleeves for and that give you a little angst when nobody's watching, when you have the quiet time of reflection and thought, and you're thinking, oh boy, oh boy.
So Dr. T, in the context of this conversation, that's an unfair question, because I have two teenage grandchildren that my wife and I are raising, and they're who keep me up at night. But to go back to context of the conversation, the work I do with the Community Relations Committee, we enforce the city and the county's fair housing laws, which prohibit discrimination in housing practices. And we're aware that annually HUD does a study of housing discrimination across the country. And annually, there are some 2 million instances of housing discrimination. However, only about 25,000 of those cases actually get to organizations like ours. And that means that the vast majority of discrimination is going unchecked. And that quite frankly, that bothers me. And I think about that very often, especially at night. The other thing is, recently, our office, along with the city's neighborhood housing and neighborhood services department, have been working to add a protected class to the fair housing ordinance, and that is source of income. We have many people who, through no fault of their own, through just unfortunate circumstances, are not able to attain housing because landlords will not rent to them because of their source of income. And so when we have folk who are just unable to participate in the housing market simply because of the way that they make their money or the source of their income, and the primary problem is Section 8 vouchers. You had mentioned earlier that many communities are afraid of having affordable housing in their particular neighborhoods because they really are concerned about the people who might attain that housing. I think the very same things happens with Section 8 housing. Section 8 housing individuals are good people like the rest of us. However, there's this stigma that because they are poor, then they're going to cause property values to go down, that they might bring crime to the neighborhood. And so we don't give them a fair chance, and that concerns me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you raise a lot of important issues, especially for us at this moment. And that fair housing issue is really significant, particularly that issue, and how much of it goes even unacknowledged or unreported. I remember when I was pursuing my PhD, I was moving to Boston. And let me put the date on this. This was back in the times where you didn't go online and get an apartment. You actually had to look through the newspaper, and and I was in another city, and I was in Indiana, and I was moving to Boston, so I would go and get the papers. You had to buy go to Indiana store and get the Boston paper, and I was looking through there to call folks, and I found somebody who was willing to rent an apartment to me, and wired her the money and all that stuff. So I drive myself as this little doctoral student, drive myself all the way to Boston. I get there, and she opens the door, and I'm going to get my keys, and she takes one look at me, and she says, I don't have an apartment for you. And she slammed the door in my face, and I'm standing there on her porch going this was she's renting the apartment above her to me. And then she comes back and she had handwritten a check, and she just opened the door and gave it back to me. And she said, you didn't tell me you were Black.
Wow.
And I stood there and I thought, did I need to tell you that? And she said, you didn't sound that way on the phone. And I guess from my voice, she couldn't tell, right, that I was probably not the person she wanted to rent to. And so in that moment, she gave me a check back for my security deposit. And I was standing on this woman's porch in the middle of a city that I didn't know anybody from, really, with a U-Haul full of all of my stuff with no place to go, going, okay, And so I got back in my U-Haul. The first thing I did as a grown woman was to break down in tears, because I'm just I don't, right. And I just think about that as I didn't go back and report that to anybody. I did what, really energizing young people try to do. You just get on the phone and try to figure it out. And I think lots of folks are trying to figure it out. And in this market, it is tough. Back in those days, you kind of could figure it out. But as Mark said at the very top of this conversation, the supply is so tight. Man, this housing market is unforgiving. Even if you were trying to just figure it out, I shudder to think what young people who are trying to do that have to, like what do you do like when there isn't a figure it out, right? You find yourself, living out of your car or your van or trying to, right? And so that just becomes a challenge for folks. So I want to ask another question, and I'm gonna just open it up at this point so you all can answer at your leisure as you feel so led. But if you could wave your magic wand, if I gave you a magic wand and you were able to, from your perch in your position as either just a great resident of the region or from your professional spot, you could wave the wand and make one kind of innovative idea or solution just happen. Like, wave my wand, this is just going to happen overnight, done. Like, that just puts a chink in the armor of like the thing that we're trying to like do in the region. Share a little bit about what that would be. Out of the box innovation. I would snap my fingers and done. But what does that look like? And you all can answer as you are so led.
Wow, another great question. If I had a magic wand and if I could wave it, I would want to see two things happen. One, we would instantly be done with poverty. There would be no more poverty in our communities. If you think about it, a lot of the issues that you spoke of this morning, and a lot of the barriers that prevent folk from having being able to achieve the American dream is related to money and poverty. And so I would erase poverty, and I would provide for people of color the same access to capital that white people have. It's my understanding that if Black people in this country had the same access to capital as white people, it would add $1.1 trillion to our annual economy. And so I think that says a lot. We as African Americans, we need to become the bank's problem. And what I mean by that is that if you are a man or a woman and you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. However, if you are a man or woman and you owe the bank $1 million or $100 million, that's the bank's problem. So we need to position ourselves to become the bank's problem.
Love that. Love that. Thanks.
So I love his comments, and I am going to share that the views that are disclosed at this moment are the reviews and reflection of Jada Grandy-Mock, not necessarily a Fifth Third. And Willie actually took my first answer, and that was around changing the minimum wage. What we have seen happen is over the years, building costs continue to go up. Developer costs continue to go up. What it costs to actually put housing stock on the ground today has increased significantly, yet we have not had a minimum wage increase in several years. And so affordability doesn't just necessarily mean, can we build it? It also means, are people paid enough in our country, in our communities, to actually be able to afford it and keep up with the rising costs? So it's not just they can't afford it, it's costing more to actually put the products in the community that we want to put there that are not only affordable, but also sustainable and that are safe. And it costs to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If I might quickly add to what Jada has just said, the question becomes, do we have an affordable housing problem, or is it a wage problem?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, I'm sorry, Mark, go right ahead.
No, go ahead, finish.
I was saying that magic wand is, once I retire, I'm on a mission. And that is, I just want affordable housing, the name, eliminated. Change the narrative. Why can't it just be housing for all? Because at the end of the day, as bankers, when we look at debt to income, if you're buying $1 million house and you make $800,000, it's affordable, right? At the end of the day, it's affordable. So changing the narrative and the context of what affordable housing is what's going to be my next mission. It's noble and it's big, but I believe it's possible with all of us.
Love it. Mark?
My magic wand would have two things. One would be all the job loss that is still with us from the COVID impact would be erased. So we lost 165,000 jobs in Charlotte. March, April, we've gained about 90,000 of those back, but we still have 75,000 job loss. And most of those are in the service industry, in leisure and hospitality in particular. And so we're seeing the burden of COVID falling disproportionately on those least able to bear it. So this also relates to another item that keeps me up at night. What began as a health crisis turned into an economic crisis, and now we're seeing the unfolding of a humanitarian crisis. And again, the burden is falling on those least able to bear it. And so again, those remaining 75,000 people going back to work would be vital. And then the conditions that support the future supply of mixed income, mixed tenure housing across the Charlotte region, I'd like to see those conditions liberalized. So that is investment in infrastructure, and that's the alignment of zoning to support mixed tenure, mixed income housing. And in that regard, the comprehensive plan that was just released 2 weeks ago by Charlotte creates a vision for that to occur. And so that, that's a cause of hope, as they're looking at liberalizing zoning to support the opportunity for builders like ourselves to provide more mixed income, mixed tenure type of housing options in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. Wow. Listen, I almost wish I could figure out how to get that magic wand in each of your hands, man. I mean, what an amazing world this would be if just the things that y'all outlined, right? What could happen. The three of you together, I think, could probably change the world. So I'm gonna put that magic wand back in your hands for just 1 second, and I want to go back to something Mark said, which I thought was brilliant. This notion of COVID-19 and what began as one thing, right, but began as a health crisis, has now become a whole housing crisis, has now become a humanitarian crisis. On the one hand, that is certainly very true, but that also offers up the possibility of some new partnerships, some folks working together who may not in the Charlotte region have really worked together before or saw their interests in one another before, to think sort of cross-sectorally or across different groups of folks. And so I wonder if I put a magic wand in your hand again, and I would ask you about what kind of partnerships you'd like to see develop and come out of this, right? If there's a positive silver lining legacy that comes out of this, what kind of partnerships? And I want to, as I talk about this, I want to just acknowledge that I think I'm looking at one of my sorority sisters, Jada, who's looked at all that fantastic ran on all of these, I want to say, even in the space of the work that we do as part of the Divine Nine, I got to get that in there, that there's so much opportunity for partnership and development. So for the three of you, wave your magic wand, think big, like what kind of partnerships, recognizing that it's not just one thing, it's everybody it's affecting all of us. How do we grow some out of the box partnerships maybe?
If I may, I would add that I think the business community has an opportunity to step up in a big way. Housing is not a social issue, it is an economic issue. And if we can't have people who can afford to live here, it's going to affect our workforce, which ultimately affects our ability to produce products and services and to really be able to deliver great GDP out of Charlotte. So at the end of the day, I would love to see healthcare providers. I would love to see businesses, for-profit businesses coming together, as well as our other financial institutions, which we've done, I think, very well here in Charlotte. And I think there's opportunity for us to do that, but everybody coming together to say, what is my part in the solution? We all can't do everything, but in the spaces and places that we occupy, we can all do something. And if we rolled up our sleeve and said, as a business owner, here's what I can do. As a healthcare provider, this is what I can do. As a developer, this is what I can do. And as a government official, this is what I can do. And if we can combine all of that together, we'll be able to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
If I might add on to what Jada has said, in addition to the list of groups that she provided, and obviously there are many more that we could add to that list. I think one of the more important things to do is to make sure that we create these collaborations and partnerships between grass tops and grassroots. Very often, the grass tops people like ourselves who sit in large conference rooms, board rooms, and when we make decisions about how we are going to fix poor communities. We talk about providing them empowerment, and we go into these communities and we tell them you are empowered, and it's an antiquated way of thinking about empowerment because what we do is we tell them what the problems are in their communities and how we are going to fix them. And if they don't do things the way that we want, the way that we would like for them to do it, then we will pull away funding, we pull away resources because they simply are not following what we want done in their communities. We've got to start looking at empowerment in a different way. Empowerment is about grassroots organizations providing necessary resources where grassroots individuals can make choices about whether they accept that empowerment and what they're going to do and what they think needs to be fixed in their community. In other words, they've got to have ownership of the process. And so with the waving of that wand, I would create those types of collaborations and partnerships from the top to the bottom, from the bottom to the top.
In my case, we don't need a magic wand. Back at the 1st of February, we announced at True Homes that we were committing to build 100 homes a year at our cost for local social service organizations, so long as they kept that in a permanent and affordable rental stock for the life of those homes. And so that would be 80 to 100 years. And so we are, as a result of that, we are having conversations and putting together housing development opportunities in collaboration with the regular suspects like Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing Partnership, like Enlivian, Community Link, Charlotte Family Housing, but also seeing emerging other people of goodwill in other industries, healthcare. For example, our lenders are coming up with creative solutions. The philanthropic community, because we can deliver these solutions much faster than the timelines you were talking about of years. We think we're going to be building our first development early next year, 18 units. And so we have over 200 units in conversation right now with a variety of organizations. Also, members of the faith community and other landowners, commercial developers, churches are opening up and looking at their land holdings differently and saying, are there opportunities that they could be part of the solution? So we're dedicated as home builders, as our vocation as home builders, to only do what only we can do. But through these partnerships, we provide the hardware of the home, and they're providing the software and that continuity, the assurance that these new homes will be in the permanent affordable rental stock. And so we're talking about delivering these brand new quality units at 40 to 60% AMI rental rates assured for that 80 to 100 year horizon. And so we're totally excited about it. It's not a magic wand moment. We are experiencing that, and it's real. And so my encouragement is for those on this call to see within their sphere of influence and in their vocational work, what can they do? What collaborations can they step into to be part of this solution? Certainly realtors have connection to excess land, undeveloped land that could be brought in to become part of this solution.
Fantastic. Fantastic. In a moment, I'm gonna come back to you, Mark, because that is truly an extraordinary feat that you're talking about. I hope that all of us on the call sort of take a moment to sort of recognize that, I do this work all across the country, and what you're talking about is extraordinary. This is not something that happens every day, like it's a Tuesday. Okay, we got to roll out the, local, permanent affordable rental stock at 40 to 60% of AMI. Like, what? How does that happen, right? Because folks are literally trying to figure that out. So I'm going to come back to that because that is really important. But I want to start by pick off what you said at the end of that. You were talking about really the role of realtors. So I want to make sure, you know, we got realtors on the call who have a very particular kind of professional role. But I think the whole conversation we've been having today is really how do we get our realtor colleagues, right, to push even further beyond the role as realtors as part of a larger, much larger adaptive leadership standpoint. And I think many of the ways that you just talked about, the sort of, you know, how can within the sphere of what realtors do, what they have at their disposal, you know, for those of you who feel led, like to talk to realtors on this call about what can I do today? So after I get off this call today and I'm all excited about all this stuff, I got, you know, Willie and Jada and Mark Elevator give me all these great ideas and Dr. T, and I'm excited. Now what? Like, what do I take from that? What do I do with that? Give some inspiration, you know, to the folks that you have that you're talking to on the call who are being motivated, right, by the inspiring conversation y'all are providing for them.
So if I may, one of the things that I always say is we can start with the man in the mirror, right? As realtors, we can start with our own convictions. We can start by addressing our own biases. We can start by addressing our own spheres of influence. We can begin to get involved in public policy as not only just realtors. I believe many of us are also residents of this region. And as residents, even beyond just realtors, we have an obligation. It's not about us and them, it's about ours. This is our community, this is our region, and we all have a role to play. The other thing that I would say, get involved on the local levels, not just in public policy, but also on boards, right? And commissions where decisions are being made, and offer your perspective and viewpoints. Many of those are volunteer-led types of efforts. However, they are efforts where many decisions get done, or many things get done, and many decisions are made, and you can make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I liked your comment earlier, Tiffany, where you described that racial equity, social justice cannot happen without housers being a vital part of the solution. Obviously, realtors are experts on transactions. They have a lens of opportunity as it relates to real estate product, land, homes. And so they can discern opportunity where others can't see it. And so they need to apply that lens and say, and dwell in a sense of possibility of what is possible. For example, we think a major solution in Charlotte is the accessory dwelling units. We've gone through a geospatial analysis where we've looked at lot sizes and setbacks and placement of homes, and we've come up with thousands of addresses where accessory dwelling units in Charlotte can be built. That's allowed under the zoning laws in Charlotte. That was provided for back in 2012. We've not taken advantage of that opportunity for accessory dwelling units. But the realtors are in a perfect position because of their relationships with past clients, for example, their understanding of neighborhood dynamics to help unlock the potential of basically backyards to double our housing supply by building accessory dwelling units that will be affordable for rental. And if we can subdivide those lots, they could become affordable for home ownership. So we think that realtors are in a very unique position to be able to help us unlock this potential, extraordinary potential of accessory dwelling units in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
If I could, I would like to go back to something that Jada said earlier, and wanted to get this in because I know Jada has to be off by 11:30, if I recall correctly. And she talked about looking at the man in the mirror, but let's also look at the woman in the mirror, if that is okay. And she acknowledged that we have to look at our own biases. I think in addition to that, we have to consider the role that implicit or unconscious bias plays throughout all of this, and the way that racism and discrimination manifests itself today. Dr. T, when you had shared the story about being in Boston and attempting to rent a house, and the potential landlord indicating that she could not tell by your voice, I guess over the phone, that you were who you are. As we have looked at the issue of race over the past 20 plus years in the work that I do, we found that there's a lot of denial. In fact, denial is the fuel of racism. There's a lot of denial about the existence of it, and it's something that we just can't pretend away. What we have found is that people think that it has gone away because they don't see it. And we don't see it because people engage in what we call have a nice day racism, or racism with a smile and a pat on the back. Very subtle, very sophisticated, often to the point that the victim of that racism has no idea that he or she has been mistreated. And as for what happened to Dr. T, that's a linguistics profile. And we've actually investigated cases here in Charlotte where African Americans have been denied housing because their voices were recognized as Black voices over the phone, including a case where a young lady, an African American young lady, after her experience, she asked her white coworker at work to call the same number to ask about housing, and the white coworker was told that yes, we have housing that's immediately available. When would you like to come out? But then again, perhaps the most pervasive way that it happens is through this implicit or unconscious bias, where the person who is exhibiting the bias, or that may be treating someone differently because of their identity, have no idea that they've treated the person that way, because to treat people of color differently in that way, for them is so normal, so common, so everyday that they really don't think or know that they've done anything wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Willie. And I think that that's right. So I want to ask one final question. I'll probably let you start, Jada, because I know you were right at the time when you have to leave us. But I want to pick up, Willie, on that conversation about unconscious bias. And I want to make folks a little bit uncomfortable, because that's sometimes how you get to some real authentic conversations. I will say that when I lived in Charlotte, I've said before, I owned a home in Charlotte, my husband and I. We also owned a lot of commercial property too, across the region, and mostly in NODA, but across some areas of the region. And I remember when I was selling my home, I had a great realtor, fantastic. He came and said, "Oh, I think this is going to go really fast. No problem. We're going to be able to sell this." But he said, I'm just going to say, he was a realtor. He was white, and he said to me, "I'm just going to be honest with you. You have a lot of things in your home that communicate to folks that you're a person of color. If you take that down, the pictures of who you are, if you take all the things down, I promise you I could sell this a couple weeks tops." And I had I had to make a decision. Like, I needed to be out of the house pretty quickly. We were moving to DC. And so I did that. I took everything down. I packed all the stuff away. We had one open house, and the house was sold over asking. It was done. And I think about that, the expediency for me as a seller of just needing to get out of the house and get top dollar, and what that required of me to sort of, erase a little bit of the uniqueness of what I brought to the home. And I did that mostly because the goal had to the house had to get sold, and my realtor told me to do it. We had to do that. But I think, Willie, that speaks to this issue of unconscious bias that for lots of us, and I think it's not just for African Americans. I think, Charlotte is a very dynamic, diverse community. You've got people, the Latinx population, you've got folks who are Asian, you've got from all over the world. And as Charlotte diversifies even more, right, some of those issues are going to come to the forefront. And so I wonder, as you all think about the work that you do, how you the challenges that the difficult decisions that you may have had to make in your own lives about some of that. Sometimes it may be speaking up for somebody who was in a difficult situation and you had to be the ally, or your own circumstances where you're hoping for a different result on the next time around. My hope is that, as folks, diversify and Charlotte gets to be a different kind of place, it wouldn't matter, but whether people knew that an African-American family lived here before, they would pay top dollar because the house was fantastic, right? Because the structure of it, the curves of it, the wow, which is why we bought the house, right? It was beautiful. The builder was like world renowned and like, wow, right? And who cares who lived there before? But I wonder about your experiences and how you are thinking about this issue of unconscious bias and how we get up and over that. Jada, I want to start with you.
You know, one of the things that I did, I'm responsible for Community Reinvestment Act regulatory compliance at Fifth Third as well. And we're primarily responsible for ensuring the bank is providing the credit needs to low and moderate income individuals. And oftentimes people had this perception that when you think of someone that's low income, you think of someone who's homeless, you think of someone who may not necessarily be working, you think of someone that may not necessarily have good, quote unquote, good values per se. And what I did is I put a face with it, and I was in front of every single one of my banking leaders or colleagues at the time. And I said, the Community Reinvestment Act defines low to moderate income of individuals who earn this much and this much. And I want you to think about the people you know that earn that amount of money every year. What do they look like? Close your eyes. I want you to tell me what they look like. And what was interesting is when all of them opened their eyes, it was not what they originally thought it was, or who they originally thought it was. And the perception of what that stood for changed. And so I began to ask more questions. The first question was, that individual that came to mind, do you believe that they deserve to have a piece of America if they want to? Yes. Do you believe that they should have a safe and decent, affordable place to live for their families? Yes. That is exactly what all of those folks out there are thinking too. So I encourage you to think differently and to put a face on what we really see, to be able to change perspectives so that we can all do something to make change.
Thank you so much for that. And I know that you have to run, so I'm going to say thank you from all the folks on the phone. And I'm sure we'll be circling back with you and a good strong whoop.
Yes, we will. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So Willie and Mark, you all have the same question, this unconscious bias challenge in a region that is diversifying, right, in ways that are really important for, right, Charlotte. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So let me first of all say, 22 years ago, my wife and I had a very similar experience as you and your husband, and except our real estate agent was African American, and she asked us to remove our Jet magazine and everything and take down the family pictures and all. And she said that she would be able to sell the house quicker if we did that. And being a proud Black man, I said, I'm not going to do that. And so we left our stuff up and out and started building the new house. And as I began to get closer and closer and closer to having 2 mortgages, I said, okay, I'm just going to try your way just to see. And so we removed those items, and sure enough, the house sold within 2 days after that to a white family. And many white families had been through this house. But this thing, this unconscious implicit bias, I think many of us don't understand what it is or that we have it. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share what I call my Costco story, which is my way of explaining unconscious bias to people. So about 2 years ago, my wife came home one day and she was really excited. And she said, look, we have Costco cards. And I said, well, what is Costco? And she explained. And she said, I need to get you over to Costco to have your picture taken. They place it on a card. And whenever you go into Costco, you show your card, they allow you into the building. And you can get some really fantastic buys. You just have to buy a whole lot of it because Costco sells in bulk. And so as a guy, one of the first things I discovered about Costco is that gasoline is like 15 or 20 cents a gallon cheaper. So I would go to Costco on Saturdays to buy gas. And if you go to Costco to buy gas, you put your Costco card with your picture into the pump. It spits it out. It asks for a credit card. You put your credit card in, you pump your gas, it gives you a receipt. So I go through this process, I get my receipt, made a quick decision to go into the store. And there's a middle-aged white female at the door that day. And she says, hi, welcome to Costco. And I said, it's good to be here. She said, I need to see your Costco card. And I said, look, I just bought gas at Costco. And so I have this gasoline receipt. And I cannot buy gas without a Costco card. So this should suffice. She said, oh, no, sir, I have to see your card with your picture on it. I said, are you sure? She said, sir, That is the policy, always has been the policy, always will be. I cannot allow anyone to go through these doors without them showing me their Costco card with the picture. I said, fine. I'm going into my pocket to get my card, and this white guy runs up from behind me. He stands in between she and I, and he says to her, my wife is in there somewhere, and I don't have a card. And she said, well, you go right on in. And so I looked at her, I said, good, and then I won't need a card. She said, sir, I just told you I cannot allow anyone to go through those doors if they do not show me their Costco cards. And I said, well, that seems rather racist or discriminatory to me. And she became upset to the point of tears that I had insinuated that she might be racist. And she said, how dare you say that? Why would you go there? Why would you say that? And so I took my time to explain to her what had just happened between her and this guy and myself. And I'm looking in her eyes and zero is registering. And I felt myself getting a little frustrated. And I was about that closer to going into Black Panther mode on her when I realized that she just didn't get it. So I finally said, ma'am, I mean no harm and I mean no disrespect, but I'm about to go into Costco and you will not.
Oh, it looks like we might have lost you, Willie, at the very part of which you were going to give us the part of that story. I'm going to go to Mark, and then we're going to come back to Willie if you want to sort of finish up on that story. Mark?
Yeah, well, I appreciate them sharing authentically. Those are heartbreaking stories to hear. In my own personal life, as a child, my family lived on a block that was block busted in Midland, Texas. But at True Homes, we are very explicit of what we stand for with our associates, our trade partners, our stakeholders. We are advocates for our home buyers, all home buyers. We're very explicit about that. We affirm the dignity of humanity. We celebrate the uniqueness of each individual. And we're very explicit about what we stand for. And we work with our associates so that they have alertness to these issues of implicit bias as we conform to equal housing standards. But again, it's not aspiring to meet a minimum standard of a law. It's about affirming the dignity of all humanity. And so our mission at True Homes is to be uniquely exceptional in how we relate with our clients, our associates, our trade partners, and stakeholders. So we go back to that relationship aspect, and we want to be uniquely exceptional in that. And so these aspects that I just described are really the cornerstones of that approach. And we're not neutral on that. We're very explicit about what we're for.
Love it. Love it. And Willie, I see that you're back. Thank you so much. We lost you for just a hot split second there, but we got you back. So I love that. Thank you so much, Mark. That this is not about meeting some standard. This is not about kind of trying to figure out how we have a conversation about it that's not born out of a real desire to meet people where they are and move folks forward and to be and to really stand in the moment of what it means to recognize the dignity of all people. And I love the way that you frame that and talk about that. I want to go back to some framing that you did earlier in our conversation that I thought was really important. I don't know if people caught it on this call, but I want to go back and catch it because it was really important. When you were talking about this issue of the work that you all are doing, particularly some of the more innovative work that you're doing about permanent affordability, and that you said that, and you were particularly speaking to the role of realtors. You were talking about how realtors are in a perfect position to unlock the potential. And you were talking about accessory dwellings, really unlock the potential of this and that. But I love the framing of that. So often when we have these conversations about housing and what's happening, it's in the spirit of all that's wrong. Folks are poor, folks have this and they're not having this and they can't, right? But I love that sort of affirmative, sort of positively framed conversation. And more of that, I think, is what a part of would make this conversation go a lot easier, would bring new partners to the table. So I'd love both for you and Willie, if there's anything, and when you think about how we unlock the potential and the framing of that, how we talk about that, that gets people excited about what's coming, right? That gets people moving to action, not because they're, oh my God, the sky is falling in, but wow, the potential in the Charlotte region. Wow, what are we about to do in Charlotte that advances us, that allows us to live into a vision of the future? Wow. So give me more of the wow. Get folks on this call and on this, you're like the wow. What does that look like when we, when you're in your full thing, right? You're giving people the fullness of it. Give us the wow of that. Get us excited about all of that.
So I would just, my parting word would be that the challenge is to lift as we rise. Charlotte's got tremendous prosperity, but in the midst of that prosperity, we also have disparity. We have disenfranchisement that are deeply rooted in our physical geography of how our communities have been built over the years. And so if we are for enfranchisement, realtors, absolutely. Realtors are all about enfranchisement. Home ownership is, as you said earlier, prosperity's front door. That's what realtors are all about. Realtors are uniquely positioned to lift as we rise, to bring enfranchisement, to bring parity where disparity exists. And so that would be the challenge. And I'm convinced that as we come together towards this vision, that Charlotte can be a shining star. We can be the city on the hill that is the prototype, where other cities are saying, wow, we need to visit Charlotte and look at these new collaborations, look at how people in different vocations have come together cross-sectorally, cross-culturally, and built bridges across spaces where divides historically existed. And would love to see in future years, Tiffany, in your slide presentation, lots of examples born out of Charlotte, born out of conversations and moments like this today, where Charlotte is the national leader, the prototype of a vision of flourishing of a community.
Love it. Love it. I'm going to take you on the road, Mark. You just, you're in trouble. If I can get you and Willie together, man, I don't know. I was like, we can solve the world. Willie, give us that same sort of unlock the potential. Give us that framing. Like, what is it that makes you feel not just like this is a moment for us, but just the vision? If we could frame this right, so people see the importance of this and they see this as an amazing opportunity, they'll be with us. Talk to us about that.
I would agree with a lot of the things that Mark actually said. And I think what it boils down to is that Charlotte has the vision. We talk about being that city on a hill all the time, and how great we are when it comes to race relations, a really great economy. For the most part, we get along, recognizing that we have some of the very same issues that other communities has across the country have. But we've got to stop talking about this vision and take action. Take active steps to make sure that the community includes everybody. It's not just about any one group. It is about everybody here who chooses to call Charlotte-Mecklenburg their home and the place where they want to raise their children and work a job, live, work, and play, and raise children. It means us recognizing that no one of us is as good as all of us. It is about collaboration. And earlier on in your presentation, on several of your slides, one word that you spoke that stuck with me was connected, or connection. And so it means us recognizing all of the connections and the possible connections that exist in our community, and taking advantage of those and pulling people together for one Charlotte, and not just a Charlotte that's divided by identity, or divided by geography, or divided by some major thoroughfare. It is about us being just one community that looks out for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Love that. Thank you all so much. So we have come to the end of our time today. For those of you who have listened and you've enjoyed hearing all the great conversation among our panelists, if you just put a +1 in the chat just to let them know that their comments and their thoughts were appreciated, that you got a lot out of it, that they've inspired you today in some way, ways that you're going to take forward. If you just put a +1 in the chat, that just reminds our panelists how important and how fantastic they were today. And I want to thank all of you, and including Jada, who had to leave early. I mean, what you all are describing, and literally, if we could just bottle it up, right, and just like ship it to every part of the country right now, I think this is a dose of what I think all of us are needing right now. And so I want to personally thank you, and I'm sure the folks at Canopy will do the same. I'm going to turn my time over to David and say, give us the wherewithal for what comes next.
All right, thank you, each and every one of you, particularly for being here, and to all of those, keep the +1s coming. And remember, you're going to get a survey immediately after this meeting, and we appreciate it if you take a moment to let us know any feedback and suggestions. This conversation that we've had is just a larger conversation that is a part of a larger conversation that our board and our leadership are going to be exploring this afternoon. And if I could linger just one more moment and say, to pay homage to one of my favorite radio personalities, Paul Harvey. I'm old enough to remember him, and just summarize that with the rest of the story, that Willie Ratchford made it into Costco that day. That middle-aged white lady learned a lesson on implicit bias. And so the next time that Mr. Ratchford walked through that door, she actually stopped him again, but it was not to ask for his ID card. It was to embrace him in a hug. As realtors, we have the potential to have those difficult conversations. And it may be painful and it may be tough, but the payoff will be love. The payoff will be an embrace. And that Costco story is one I've heard one time in my life, and I will never forget it. And I can guarantee you, as realtors, our stories can be the same type of stories that can be heard once, remembered, and passed on. To the legendary Boyce, you are an inspiration. The things that you're doing in housing, if we all could figure out ways to duplicate what you do in housing, we'd all make the world a better place. And to Willie, you are an institution. God bless you, sir. And to Dr. T, you're worth every penny. You are an inspiration. You are a guidepost of strength. And it is with that that I ask us all to go out and helpfully make our world a better place. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.